Hi everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before we start I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, get comfy and relax and let's begin. I was in the middle of the woods, camping alone under the vast expanse of the night sky. The crackling of the campfire was the only sound breaking the silence of the forest around me. The air was cool, and the shadows danced eerily among the trees. I was about to drift off to sleep when something stirred me awake. A shiver ran down my spine as I realized I was not alone. There, surrounding my campsite, stood a group of strangers. They were eerily still, their faces hidden in the darkness, watching me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. Fear seized me, and I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I stumbled backward, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. How had they found me? And what did they want? But there was no time to ponder these questions. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. With trembling hands, I fumbled for my flashlight, the beam casting long, twisted shadows on the forest floor as I frantically searched for an escape route. But as I turned to flee, I realized I was surrounded. The strangers had closed in around me, their faces still obscured in the darkness. Panic surged through me as I realized there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I tried to reason with them, to plead for mercy, but they remained silent, their gaze unwavering. It was as if they were waiting for something terrible and inevitable. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I knew I had no choice but to fight. I lashed out, striking out blindly at the strangers in a desperate bid to break free from their grasp. But it was like fighting against shadows, their forms shifting and twisting in the darkness. As the struggle raged on, I felt something deep within me snap. Fear gave way to rage, and I fought with a ferocity I never knew I possessed. But even as I fought, I could feel myself growing weaker, my strength draining away with each passing moment. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light in the darkness, a path leading to safety. With one final burst of adrenaline, I broke free from the grasp of the strangers and raced towards the light, my heart pounding in my chest. As I emerged from the forest, the first light of dawn greeted me, casting a warm glow over the horizon. I collapsed onto the forest floor, my body spent from the ordeal. But even as I lay there, gasping for breath, I knew I had escaped something unspeakable, something that lurked in the darkness of the woods, waiting to claim its next victim. It was a bitterly cold winter night, and I was driving alone along a deserted highway, the only sound the steady hum of the engine and the occasional whistling of the wind outside. The road stretched out before me, empty and desolate, disappearing into the darkness ahead. As I drove, my mind wandered, my thoughts drifting aimlessly as I tried to stay focused on the road. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something, a figure standing on the side of the road, their thumbs stuck out in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker in need of a ride. Without really thinking, I pulled over to the side of the road and rolled down the window. The figure approached, stepping out of the shadows and into the dim glow of my headlights. She was a young woman, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with desperation. She looked cold and scared, and something about her tugged at my heartstrings. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice echoing in the silence of the night. She nodded, her lips trembling slightly. I just need a ride," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Without another word, she climbed into the passenger seat, and I pulled back onto the road, the darkness swallowing us up once again. As we drove, I tried to make small talk to put her at ease, but she remained silent and withdrawn, her eyes fixed on the road ahead with a haunted expression. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that there was something not quite right about her. But I pushed the thought aside, chalking it up to nerves and exhaustion. But as the miles ticked by, her behavior grew increasingly erratic. She fidgeted in her seat, her hands twisting in her lap, and I could feel the tension in the air thickening with each passing moment. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the road ahead, but the feeling of unease gnawed at me like a persistent itch at the back of my mind. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, she reached into her pocket and pulled out a knife, a long, gleaming blade that glinted in the dim light of the dashboard. My heart stopped, fear coursing through me like an electric shock. I glanced over at her, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what was happening. But she just sat there, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, the knife clutched tightly in her hand. And then, without warning, she lunged at me, the blade flashing in the darkness as she tried to stab me. Instinct kicked in, and I swerved the car to the side of the road, slamming on the brakes as I fought to regain control. The car skidded to a stop, the tires screeching against the asphalt, and I scrambled out of the driver's seat, my heart pounding in my chest. But she was right behind me, her footsteps echoing in the silence of the night as she pursued me across the frozen ground. I ran as fast as I could, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I sprinted through the darkness, desperate to escape. But she was gaining on me, her footsteps growing louder and louder with each passing moment. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw the headlights of an approaching car in the distance. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed myself to run faster, the sound of the engine growing louder and louder with each passing moment. And then, finally, I reached the safety of the road, collapsing onto the pavement with a sense of overwhelming relief. The car screeched to a halt beside me, and I looked up to see the driver, a concerned-looking man peering out at me from behind the wheel. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. I nodded, too shaken to speak. And as he helped me to my feet and ushered me into the safety of his car, I couldn't help but feel grateful for my narrow escape from danger. It was a quiet night, and I was on my usual shift as a paramedic, ready to respond to any emergency that came our way. The radio crackled to life with a call from dispatch, a report of a disturbance at a remote farmhouse on the outskirts of town. Without hesitation, I revved up the ambulance and raced to the scene, the darkness swallowing the road ahead as I drove. As I arrived, the farmhouse loomed ahead, isolated in the stillness of the night. My heart raced as I approached the front door, the sense of dread growing with each step. I pushed open the door and entered cautiously, calling out for anyone who might be in need of help. But there was no response, only silence that seemed to stretch on forever. As I made my way through the house, a sickening feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. And then, I found them, a family, slaughtered in their beds, their blood staining the sheets and the walls around them. Horror washed over me as I realized the magnitude of what had happened here. I stumbled back, my mind reeling with disbelief and fear. Who could have done this? And why? But there was no time to dwell on these questions. I had to focus on finding any survivors and getting them to safety. With trembling hands, I continued my search, checking every room of the farmhouse for any sign of life. But there was nothing, only the echoes of my own footsteps as I moved through the darkness. As I reached the last room, a sense of dread washed over me. I knew that I was about to uncover something terrible, something that would haunt me for the rest of my days. I pushed open the door and entered cautiously, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. And then, I saw him, a man, standing in the corner of the room, his eyes wild with madness. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that the killer was still here, still lurking in the shadows. Without a word, the man lunged at me, his hands reaching out with a deadly intent. I dodged out of the way just in time, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I fought to defend myself. We struggled, grappling with each other in the darkness as the room seemed to close in around us. But I refused to give up, determined to stop this madman before he could harm anyone else. With a burst of strength, I managed to overpower him, pinning him to the ground as I called for backup on my radio. Minutes felt like hours as I waited for help to arrive, every second stretching out into eternity. But finally, I heard the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me as the police burst into the room, taking the killer into custody and securing the scene. As I stepped out into the cool night air, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude that I had survived, that I had been able to stop the killer before it was too late. So, me and my buddies, we decided to go camping in this secluded valley we'd heard about. We thought it would be a great way to get away from the hustle and bustle of the city and just relax for a bit. Anyway, we found this perfect spot by a stream, surrounded by trees and far away from any other campers. It was like our own little slice of paradise. But then, on the second night of our trip, things started to get weird. We were sitting around the campfire, just shooting the breeze and roasting marshmallows, when we heard this strange noise coming from the woods. At first, we tried to ignore it, to convince ourselves that it was just an animal or something. But then we heard it again, closer this time, and I could feel this sense of unease creeping over me. I glanced nervously at my friends, but they were all just sitting there, staring into the fire like nothing was wrong. It was like I was the only one who could hear it, the sound of something moving through the trees, getting closer and closer with each passing second. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a strange, silent figure standing at the edge of the clearing, just watching us with these empty, soulless eyes. I tried to point it out to my friends, to warn them about the danger lurking nearby, but when I looked back, the figure was gone, vanished into the darkness like it had never been there at all. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong, that we were being watched by something far more sinister than we could have imagined. We decided to pack up our stuff and head back to the car, to get out of there before whatever was lurking in the woods decided to make its move. But as we were leaving, I felt this strange sensation, like something was following us, tracking our every move through the trees. I glanced nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure standing there, watching us with those empty eyes. But there was nothing there, nothing but darkness and silence stretching out into the night. We walked faster, our hearts pounding in our chests as we tried to put as much distance between us and whatever was out there in the darkness. And then, just when we thought we were safe, we heard it, the sound of something moving through the trees, getting closer and closer with each passing second. We broke into a run, our footsteps echoing through the forest as we raced to escape whatever horror was chasing us. But no matter how fast we ran, it was always right behind us, just out of sight but always there, lurking in the shadows. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my lungs burning with exertion as we pushed ourselves to the limit, desperate to get away from whatever was hunting us. And then, just when we thought we couldn't run any further, we burst out of the trees and into the clearing where we had parked the car. We didn't stop running until we were safely inside, the doors locked and the engine roaring to life as we sped away from that cursed valley as fast as we could. We didn't talk about what had happened, didn't mention the strange figure or the feeling of being watched. But deep down, we all knew that we had encountered something truly terrifying in those woods. We were on our way home, tired after a long day of sightseeing, when the traffic on the main road came to a standstill. Frustrated and eager to get home, we decided to take a detour through a desolate stretch of road to avoid the congestion. At first, everything seemed fine. The road was empty, the sky was clear, and we were making good time. But then, as we rounded a bend, we saw him, a man standing in the middle of the road, his eyes fixed on us as we approached. I felt a shiver run down my spine as we got closer. There was something about him that just didn't sit right with me. He was tall and gaunt, with a wild look in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. As we passed him, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there, watching us as we drove away. It sent a shiver down my spine, but I tried to push the thought out of my mind and focus on getting home. But then, just when I thought we were in the clear, we saw him again, standing on the side of the road up ahead, his figure illuminated by the headlights of our car. My heart skipped a beat as we approached, and I felt a sense of dread wash over me. I told my partner to keep driving, but they were frozen in place, staring at the man with wide eyes. As we passed him, I could see the fear in their face, mirrored in my own. We both knew something was seriously wrong. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but deep down, I knew we were in trouble. The man seemed to be following us, popping up at random intervals along the road, his presence growing more menacing with each passing moment. I urged my partner to call the police, but there was no signal out here in the middle of nowhere. We were completely on our own, with no one to help us if things went south. As we drove on, the tension in the car grew thicker with each passing mile. Every shadow seemed to conceal the man's lurking presence, every sound sending us into a panic. We were trapped in a nightmare of our own making, with no way out and no one to turn to for help. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, we rounded a bend and saw him standing in the middle of the road ahead, blocking our path. My heart pounded in my chest as we approached, his figure looming larger and larger in the darkness. I told my partner to stop the car, but they were frozen in place, their hands gripping the steering wheel in a death grip. I could see the fear in their eyes, mirrored in my own, as we braced ourselves for whatever was about to happen. But then, just as suddenly as he had appeared, the man vanished into thin air, leaving us alone on the empty road. We sat there for a moment, stunned and shaken, before my partner finally found the courage to hit the gas and get us out of there. I'm a stay-at-home dad, and this weekend, it's just me and the kids at this remote cabin while my wife is off visiting family. Last night, something happened that still has me shaking. I woke up to the sound of footsteps in the hallway. At first, I thought it was just one of the kids wandering around, but when I looked at the clock, I realized it was way too late for them to be up. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw them, my two children standing at the foot of the bed, staring at me with blank expressions. I called out to them, but they didn't respond. They just stood there, unmoving, their eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself that they were just sleepwalking or something, but something about the whole situation felt off. I reached out to touch them, to see if they were okay, but when my hand brushed against their skin, it was like touching ice. They were freezing cold, even though the cabin was warm. I tried to wake them up, to snap them out of whatever trance they were in, but nothing worked. It was like they were completely disconnected from reality, like they were somewhere else entirely. I didn't know what to do. I felt completely helpless, completely at the mercy of whatever was happening to my children. I sat there for what felt like hours, watching them, waiting for them to snap out of it. But they just stood there, staring at me with those empty eyes. Eventually, exhaustion got the better of me, and I must have dozed off because when I woke up again, it was morning, and the kids were back in their beds, sleeping peacefully. I wanted to believe that it was all just a bad dream, that none of it had actually happened, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. There was something in that cabin with us last night, something dark and sinister, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still there, lurking just out of sight. I spent the rest of the weekend on edge, jumping at every little noise, every shadow that flickered across the walls. I wanted to leave, to get out of there and never look back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had happened to my children wasn't over yet. When my wife finally came back, I told her everything that had happened, but she just brushed it off, saying it was probably just a bad dream or something. But I know what I saw, what I experienced, and I can't shake the feeling that there's something in that cabin, something dark and malevolent, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. I don't know if we'll ever go back to that cabin again. I live in a shared apartment with my roommates, and this weekend, I found myself home alone. It's not unusual. My roommates often have plans or go out of town, leaving me to fend for myself. I was in the shower when it happened. The sound of water cascading down filled the bathroom, drowning out the world beyond the curtain. That's when I heard it, a whisper, soft and barely audible, coming from the other side of the bathroom door. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, the sound of the water mingling with the silence of the apartment. But then I heard it again, my name, whispered in a voice that sent shivers down my spine. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I strained to listen. But the whispering had stopped, leaving nothing but the steady drumming of the shower to fill the silence. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that it was just the creaks and groans of an old apartment building settling into the night. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. I hurried through my shower, my heart pounding in my chest as I stepped out onto the tiled floor. I listened intently, but there was nothing, no whispering, no sound of movement from beyond the bathroom door. I wrapped a towel around myself and tiptoed out into the hallway, my senses on high alert as I scanned the dimly lit apartment for any sign of intruders. But everything seemed normal. The living room was empty, the lights casting long shadows across the floor as they flickered in the darkness. I tried to convince myself that I was just being paranoid, that there was no one else in the apartment with me. But as I made my way to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air. I locked the door behind me and climbed into bed, pulling the covers up tight around me as I tried to push the events of the evening out of my mind. But as I lay there in the darkness, my thoughts kept returning to the whispering in the bathroom. Who could it have been? And why were they calling my name? I tried to tell myself that it was just a prank, that one of my roommates was playing a trick on me. But deep down, I knew that it was something more sinister, something that I couldn't explain away with logic or reason. I tossed and turned, unable to shake the feeling of dread that settled over me like a suffocating blanket. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a jolt of fear through me, and I found myself jumping at shadows in the darkness. But despite my fear, I eventually drifted off to sleep, the exhaustion of the day catching up with me at last. I woke with a start, the sound of footsteps echoing through the apartment. I lay there in the darkness, frozen with fear as I listened to the sound of someone moving around outside my room. I wanted to scream, to call out for help, but fear held me paralyzed, my voice stuck in my throat as I waited for whatever was out there to make its move. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, the footsteps stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that hung heavy in the air. I lay there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move, too afraid to even breathe as I waited for the dawn to break and chase away the darkness. And then, finally, as the first light of dawn filtered through the blinds, I summoned the courage to get out of bed and investigate. I crept out into the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the apartment for any sign of intruders. But there was nothing, no one hiding in the shadows, no sign of forced entry or foul play. It was as if the events of the night before had never happened, leaving me to wonder if it had all been just a nightmare. But deep down, I knew the truth. I had been targeted by someone who had been watching me from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I called the police and reported the incident, but without any evidence or witnesses, there was little they could do. I lived in a small town where everyone knew each other, or at least that's what I thought. My neighbor, Mr. Sears, seemed like a normal guy at first, friendly, polite, always ready with a smile and a wave. But as I got to know him better, I started to notice things, strange things that didn't quite add up. There were the late-night noises coming from his house, strange banging and crashing sounds that kept me up at night. And then, there were the rumors, whispers of disappearances and strange occurrences that always seemed to lead back to Mr. Sears's doorstep. I tried to ignore them at first, to tell myself that it was just idle gossip, but deep down, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease that settled over me whenever I saw him. So, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started keeping a close eye on Mr. Sears, watching his every move from my window across the street. And what I saw chilled me to the bone. I saw him lurking around town at odd hours, always wearing this eerie grin that sent shivers down my spine. I saw him talking to people, innocent people, people I knew, and there was something about the way he looked at them, something cold and calculating that made my blood run cold. But the final straw came when I saw him dragging something, or someone, into his house late one night. I couldn't see who or what it was, but the way he moved, with this eerie sense of purpose, sent alarm bells ringing in my head. I knew I had to do something, to stop Mr. Sears before it was too late. So, I gathered up my courage and went to the police, telling them everything I had seen and heard. But they just brushed me off, telling me that there was no evidence to support my claims, that I was just seeing things. I felt this overwhelming sense of frustration wash over me as I realized that no one was going to help me, that I was on my own in this fight against Mr. Sears. But I refused to give up. I couldn't sit back and do nothing while he continued to terrorize the community. So, I started gathering evidence, taking photos, keeping a detailed log of his movements, anything that might help prove that he was up to no good. And then, one day, I stumbled upon something that sent chills down my spine, a hidden room in Mr. Sears's basement, filled with all kinds of disturbing items, chains, knives, and other implements of torture. I knew then that I had uncovered the truth. Mr. Sears was a psychopath, a dangerous man who had been terrorizing the community for years. But I couldn't go to the police. I knew they wouldn't believe me, not without solid evidence to back up my claims. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I waited until Mr. Sears left his house one day, then I snuck inside, determined to gather enough evidence to bring him to justice. But as I searched through his belongings, I heard the front door open and close, followed by the sound of footsteps coming down the hallway. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that Mr. Sears was home, and I was trapped inside his house. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before he found me, and God knows what he would do to me. So, I made a run for it, racing towards the back door as fast as my legs would carry me. But just as I reached it, I felt a hand grab hold of my arm, pulling me back with a strength that I never knew Mr. Sears possessed. I struggled against his grip, fighting for my life as he dragged me towards the basement door. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. The police had finally arrived, alerted by a neighbor who had seen me sneaking into Mr. Sears's house. They burst through the front door, guns drawn, and found us struggling in the hallway. I felt this overwhelming sense of relief wash over me as they pulled me away from Mr. Sears, as they arrested him and took him away in handcuffs. I knew then that I had done the right thing, that I had stopped a dangerous man from hurting anyone else ever again. And as I watched them take him away, I couldn't help but feel grateful, grateful to be alive, grateful to have stopped Mr. Sears before it was too late. I've always been a fan of camping, so when my friends suggested we go on a weekend trip to the woods outside of town, I jumped at the chance. We packed up our gear and set out for what we thought would be a fun and relaxing getaway. As we arrived at the campsite and set up our tents, everything seemed normal. The crackling of the campfire, the chirping of the crickets, the smell of pine in the air. But as the sun began to set and darkness fell over the forest, things took a turn for the sinister. We were sitting around the fire, roasting marshmallows and telling ghost stories, when we heard a strange chanting coming from the woods. At first, we brushed it off as our imaginations playing tricks on us, but as the chanting grew louder, we knew that something was seriously wrong. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate, creeping through the trees until we stumbled upon a clearing deep in the forest. And what we saw there made our blood run cold. A group of robed figures stood in a circle, chanting in a language we didn't understand. In the center of the circle was a large bonfire, its flames casting eerie shadows on the trees. We watched in horror as the cultists performed their ritual, their movements synchronized and methodical. But when one of the cultists looked up and spotted us, we knew that we had been discovered. Without a moment's hesitation, we turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush as fast as our legs would carry us. We thought we had lost them, but as we reached the edge of the forest, we realized that we were surrounded. The cultists emerged from the shadows, their faces twisted in sinister smiles as they closed in on us. With nowhere left to run, we knew that we had to fight for our lives. We grabbed whatever makeshift weapons we could find, sticks, rocks, anything that would give us an edge, and prepared to defend ourselves against the onslaught. The cultists attacked with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold, their blows raining down on us with brutal force. But we refused to go down without a fight, and we fought back with everything we had, determined to make it out of the woods alive. In the chaos of the battle, I lost sight of my friends, the sounds of their screams and the clash of weapons echoing through the night. But I knew that I had to keep fighting, to keep pushing forward no matter what. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw a glimmer of light in the darkness, the headlights of a car, driving down the nearby road. With renewed determination, I fought my way through the throng of cultists and raced towards the light, praying that help was on the way. As I burst out of the woods and onto the road, I collapsed in exhaustion, the adrenaline wearing off and leaving me drained and battered. But as I looked back at the forest, I knew that I had survived, that I had escaped the clutches of the cult and lived to tell the tale. I may never know what the cultists had planned for us that night. I was alone in this empty house, showing it to potential buyers. The place felt eerie, but I brushed it off as just my imagination running wild. As I walked through the rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Then, I heard it, the sound of children laughing and playing. It sent shivers down my spine because I knew the house was supposed to be vacant. I tried to tell myself that it was just the wind or the creaking of the old floorboards, but deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The laughter seemed to be coming from all around me, echoing through the empty rooms and corridors. It sounded so real, so vivid, that I couldn't ignore it. I hesitated, unsure of what to do. Part of me wanted to run out of there as fast as I could, but another part of me knew that I had a job to do. I had to show this house to potential buyers, no matter how creepy it felt. So, I forced myself to keep walking, to keep showing the house, even though every instinct in my body was screaming at me to get out of there. But the laughter only seemed to get louder, more insistent, as if whatever was causing it was trying to get my attention. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my palms sweating with fear. I tried to focus on the task at hand, to ignore the laughter and pretend like everything was normal, but it was no use. It felt like I was being watched, like there were eyes on me from every corner of the room. I finally reached the last room, the master bedroom, and that's when things took a turn for the worse. As I stepped inside, the laughter stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that was almost deafening. I looked around the room, searching for any sign of what could have caused the laughter, but there was nothing there. It was just me, alone in this empty house, with no explanation for what I had just heard. I quickly finished showing the house and made my way back to my car, eager to get out of there and put some distance between myself and whatever was lurking inside that place. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, still following me, even though I was miles away from that creepy old house. I never did find out what was causing the laughter, and to be honest, I'm not sure I want to know. It was supposed to be a bonding experience, just me and my son out in the wilderness, learning to fend for ourselves and reconnecting with nature. But as we set on our camping trip, I could never have imagined the nightmare that awaited us in the depths of the forest. We started off strong, my son eager to learn and full of excitement at the prospect of spending time with his old man. We hiked through the woods, set up our campsite, and roasted marshmallows over the crackling fire as the sun dipped below the horizon. But then disaster struck. In the dead of night, a fierce storm descended upon us, tearing through the trees and sending torrents of rain cascading down upon our heads. In the chaos, we lost our way, the trail disappearing beneath our feet as we stumbled blindly through the darkness. Panic set in as we realized we were lost, alone in the wilderness with no way of finding our way back to civilization. But I knew I had to stay strong for my son, to protect him from whatever dangers lurked in the shadows. We pressed on, my heart pounding in my chest as we trudged through the underbrush, the eerie silence of the forest broken only by the sound of our footsteps and the distant rumble of thunder. I kept my son close, my hand tight around his, as we navigated the treacherous terrain. But then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of something moving through the undergrowth, something large and predatory stalking us through the darkness. I knew we were in danger, that we were being hunted by something far more dangerous than any wild animal. I pushed my son behind me, shielding him from whatever horrors lay ahead as we stumbled through the forest, desperate to find a way out. But no matter which direction we turned, we seemed only to get deeper and deeper into the heart of the woods, further away from safety with each passing moment. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clearing in the forest, a small patch of moonlit ground surrounded by towering trees. It was our only chance, our only hope of escaping whatever nightmare had taken hold of us. I scooped up my son in my arms, his small frame trembling against mine as I sprinted towards the clearing, the sound of our pursuer hot on our heels. But just as we reached the safety of the open space, I felt something grab hold of my ankle, pulling me back into the darkness with a strength that defied belief. I fought with every ounce of strength I had, struggling against the unseen force that sought to drag me down into the depths of the forest. And then, just when it seemed like I couldn't hold on any longer, I felt my son's hand slip into mine, his small fingers intertwining with mine as he pulled me free from the grasp of whatever evil lurked in the shadows. Together, we stumbled out of the forest and into the safety of the open meadow, the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon as we collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but alive. We had survived the night, escaped the horrors of the forest, and emerged stronger than ever before. It was just another quiet evening in our rural farmhouse. My wife and I were enjoying a peaceful night at home, savoring the tranquility of the countryside. But then, out of nowhere, we heard it, a faint but unmistakable sound coming from the depths of the house. At first, we tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the creaks and groans that old houses tend to make. But as the minutes passed, the noise grew louder and more persistent. It sounded like someone was moving around down there, shuffling and scraping against the floorboards. With a sense of unease gnawing at us, we exchanged a worried glance before mustering up the courage to investigate. Slowly, cautiously, we made our way to the basement door, our hearts pounding in our chests. To our horror, we found the door wide open, gaping like a hungry mouth into the darkness below. We were certain we had locked it earlier, so the sight sent a shiver down our spines. With trembling hands, I reached for the light switch and flicked it on, illuminating the stairway leading down into the basement. The light revealed nothing but empty space, but the feeling of dread lingered in the air like a thick fog. Summoning all our courage, we descended the stairs, each creak of the wooden steps echoing loudly in the silence. As we reached the bottom, we scanned the dimly lit room, searching for any sign of intruders. But aside from the usual clutter, old furniture, stacks of boxes, and cobwebs clinging to the walls, there was nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of forced entry, no indication that anyone had been down here. Confused and on edge, we exchanged nervous glances, unsure of what to do next. Should we call the police? Or was it just our imaginations playing tricks on us? As we stood there, grappling with our fear and uncertainty, the noise suddenly started up again, louder this time, more insistent. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing through the darkness. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that we were not alone in the basement. Someone, or something, was down here with us, lurking in the shadows. Heart pounding, I called out, my voice trembling with fear. "Who's there?" But there was no response, only the sound of footsteps drawing closer, closer. In a panic, we scrambled back up the stairs, desperate to escape whatever lurked below. I slammed the basement door shut behind us, locking it securely this time, but the sense of dread lingered like a dark cloud over our heads. We debated whether to call the police, but without any evidence of a break-in, we knew they wouldn't take us seriously. And besides, what could they do? We were on our own out here in the middle of nowhere. For the rest of the night, we huddled together in our bedroom, too terrified to sleep, listening intently for any more signs of intruders. But aside from the occasional creak of the floorboards and the howling of the wind outside, the house remained silent. Morning finally dawned, casting a pale light into the room and dispelling some of the darkness that had gripped us during the night. With a sense of relief, we ventured downstairs, half expecting to find the basement door wide open again. But to our surprise, everything seemed normal. The door was still locked, and there were no signs of anyone or anything having been down there. As the day wore on, we tried to put the events of the previous night behind us, chalking it up to our imaginations running wild. But deep down, we couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. To this day, we still don't know what happened that night, whether it was a prowler, an animal, or something more sinister. I'm a police officer in a small-town apartment complex. After a late shift, I return home, exhausted and ready to unwind. The night is quiet as I enter my apartment, the only sound the soft hum of the air conditioning. As I settle in for the night, I hear something strange, the sound of someone trying to pick the lock on my front door. My heart skips a beat as I freeze in place, listening intently to the rhythmic clicks and scrapes coming from the other side. Instinct kicks in, and I reach for my gun, my hand shaking slightly as I prepare for the worst. I'm trained for situations like this, but nothing can fully prepare you for the fear that grips you when danger lurks just outside your door. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I creep toward the door, careful to make as little noise as possible. Every creak of the floorboards feels like an eternity as I inch closer to the source of the sound. Finally, I reach the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I steel myself for what lies on the other side. With a deep breath, I throw open the door, my gun raised and ready to fire. But to my surprise, There's no one there. The hallway is empty. The only evidence of the intruder's presence, the faint scrape marks on the lock. Confused and more than a little shaken, I step into the hallway, my eyes scanning the area for any sign of movement. But there's nothing, just the eerie silence of the night. I check the lock, confirming that it's secure before retreating back into my apartment, my mind racing with questions. Who would try to break into my home, and why? As I ponder the possibilities, a sense of unease settles over me like a heavy blanket. The thought of someone lurking just outside my door fills me with a creeping dread, and I find it hard to shake the feeling that I'm being watched. But despite my fear, I know that I can't let it consume me. I'm a police officer, trained to handle situations like this with calm and composure. With a deep breath, I force myself to relax, telling myself that it was just a random act of vandalism or perhaps a mistake. But deep down, I know that it was something more, something sinister lurking just beyond the edge of my vision. For the rest of the night, I keep a close eye on my surroundings, my senses heightened as I wait for any sign of trouble. But the night passes without incident, and soon, the first light of dawn begins to filter through the windows, banishing the darkness that had plagued me all night. I was driving down this long stretch of highway, just trying to get home after a long day of work. It was late, and I was tired, so when I saw the sign for a rest stop, I figured it was a good time to pull over and stretch my legs. But when I got there, something felt off. The place was deserted, like completely empty. I mean, there were no other cars in the parking lot, and I didn't see anyone inside the building. I shrugged it off and parked my car anyway. I got out and walked around a bit, trying to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping over me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I walked up to the building and pushed open the door. It creaked loudly on its hinges, echoing through the empty space. The inside was dimly lit, with flickering fluorescent lights casting eerie shadows on the walls. I called out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But there was no answer, just the sound of my own voice bouncing back at me. I started to feel really uneasy then, like I shouldn't be there. But something inside me told me to keep going, to explore and see what I could find. I walked down the hallway, passing rows of empty vending machines and dusty tables. It was like the place had been abandoned for years, even though it looked like it had been used recently. I turned a corner and found myself in a darkened room. There were shelves lining the walls, filled with all sorts of random stuff, books, toys, even old clothes. But what caught my eye was the table in the center of the room. There was something sitting on it, something that looked out of place among all the other junk. I walked over to get a closer look, my heart pounding in my chest. And that's when I saw it, a small, wooden box, just sitting there all by itself. I reached out and picked it up, feeling a shiver run down my spine. It was heavy and cold to the touch, like it had been sitting there for a long time. I opened the box slowly, not sure what I would find inside. And that's when I saw them, a stack of old photographs, all black and white and faded with age. I picked one up and studied it closely. It was a picture of a group of people, standing outside the rest stop with big smiles on their faces. But as I looked closer, I noticed something strange about the picture. There was something lurking in the background, something dark and shadowy that shouldn't have been there. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized what I was looking at. It was like something out of a horror movie, a ghostly figure, watching the people in the photograph with cold, empty eyes. I dropped the picture and stumbled back, feeling sick to my stomach. I knew then that I had to get out of there, that I had to leave before whatever was haunting that place found me too. I ran back to my car, not stopping until I was miles away from the abandoned rest stop. So, I was out hiking in the woods, trying to clear my head and get away from it all for a while. I'd been walking for hours, and the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the forest floor. That's when I stumbled upon the cabin. It was hidden away in a clearing, surrounded by thick trees and overgrown bushes. At first, I thought it was abandoned, but as I got closer, I could see that the door was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should go inside. But then the wind picked up, and I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew I didn't have much of a choice. I had to seek shelter for the night. So, I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The air was stale and musty, and the floorboards creaked under my weight as I made my way further into the cabin. That's when I saw them, the human remains, scattered around the room like discarded trash. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what I was looking at, and I felt bile rise in my throat. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with horror as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But there was no denying it, this cabin was the lair of a deranged killer, and I had stumbled right into their clutches. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before the killer returned and found me in their hideout. But as I turned to leave, I heard a noise, a low, guttural growl coming from somewhere deep within the cabin. I froze in terror, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to see through the darkness. But there was nothing there, nothing but shadows and silence. I knew I had to leave, to get as far away from this place as possible. But as I made my way to the door, I stumbled over something, a trapdoor hidden beneath a rug in the corner of the room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I lifted the trapdoor to reveal a set of stairs leading down into darkness. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should go down there. But then I heard another noise, a faint whimpering coming from somewhere deep within the darkness. I knew I couldn't leave whoever was down there to suffer alone. So, I gathered up my courage and descended into the depths of the cabin. The air grew colder as I made my way down the stairs, and the darkness seemed to swallow me whole. But I pressed on, driven by a sense of urgency and desperation. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I stumbled upon a sight that chilled me to the bone. It was a room, small and cramped, with chains hanging from the walls and a single figure huddled in the corner. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized who or what I was looking at. It was a person, barely alive and covered in bruises and cuts. I rushed to their side, my hands shaking as I tried to free them from their chains. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the killer was lurking just out of sight, waiting to strike. I didn't dare to look behind me as I worked, my hands moving as quickly as they could as I tried to free the person from their bonds. And then, finally, the chains fell away, and I helped them to their feet. We didn't waste a second. We ran, our footsteps echoing through the darkness as we raced to escape the cabin and the horrors that lurked within. And then, just when I thought we were safe, I heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing through the darkness behind us, getting closer and closer with each passing second. We didn't dare to look back. We just ran faster, our hearts pounding in our chests as we prayed for a miracle. And then, finally, we burst out of the cabin and into the blinding light of day. We didn't stop running until we were safely back at the trailhead, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and fear. We didn't speak as we made our way back to civilization, our minds reeling with the horrors we had witnessed. I was a college student, and like many nights before, I found myself staying up late studying in my dorm room. The winter chill seeped through the cracks in the windows, adding an extra layer of discomfort to the already tense atmosphere. As I sat at my desk, poring over my textbooks, I heard a faint scratching sound coming from the direction of my closet. At first, I brushed it off as nothing more than a rodent, maybe a mouse or a rat seeking shelter from the cold. But as the scratching continued, growing louder and more persistent with each passing moment. I couldn't ignore it any longer. I knew I had to investigate, to make sure there wasn't something more sinister lurking in the darkness of my closet. With trembling hands, I approached the closet door and slowly pulled it open, my heart pounding in my chest as I braced myself for what I might find. And then, to my horror, I saw it, a figure crouched in the shadows of the closet, its eyes gleaming with malice as it stared back at me. I froze in place, my mind reeling as I struggled to comprehend what I was seeing. Who was this intruder, and how had they managed to get into my dorm room undetected? I tried to speak, to demand answers from the intruder, but the words seemed to stick in my throat, choked off by fear. And then, without warning, the intruder lunged towards me, its hands reaching out to grab me. I stumbled backwards, my heart racing as I struggled to defend myself against the attacker. But just as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. I stood there in shock, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to process what had just happened. And then, to my horror, I realized that I was not alone. There were more figures lurking in the darkness, their eyes gleaming with malice as they stared back at me. I knew I had to get out of my dorm room, and fast. I turned and ran towards the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I fumbled with the lock. But just as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a voice behind me, a soft, sinister whisper that sent chills down my spine. I turned around and saw the figures standing in the doorway, blocking my only escape route. I knew I was trapped, with no way out and nowhere left to run. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, I heard the sound of footsteps in the hallway. The campus security was on their way. I felt a surge of relief wash over me as I realized that help was finally on the way. I turned back towards the figures in the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared to confront them one last time. But to my surprise, they were gone, vanished into thin air as if they had never been there at all. I stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Had it all been just a figment of my imagination? Or had I narrowly escaped a brush with something far more sinister? It was a cold winter night, and my family and I were fast asleep in our home. I was awakened by the sound of banging coming from downstairs, as if someone was trying to force their way in. My heart began to race as I realized that we were being targeted by intruders. I quickly woke up my wife and children, whispering urgently for them to stay quiet and stay together. As the banging grew louder, I knew we had to act fast. I grabbed the nearest weapon, a baseball bat, and made my way downstairs, my senses on high alert. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I could see the door shaking violently as the intruders tried to force it open. I could hear their muffled voices, their threats and demands echoing through the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I swung open the door, ready to confront the intruders and defend my family at all costs. But as the door swung open, I was met with a blinding light. The intruders had brought flashlights, shining them directly into my eyes, momentarily blinding me. I stumbled backward, disoriented and vulnerable, as the intruders rushed forward, their faces hidden behind ski masks. I swung the baseball bat wildly, trying to fend them off, but they were too fast, too determined. They wrestled the bat from my grip and threw me to the ground, pinning me down with surprising strength. I could hear my wife and children screaming in terror as the intruders ransacked the house, searching for something or someone. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized what they were after: our safe, hidden away in the closet upstairs, filled with our most valuable possessions. I knew I had to do something, anything, to protect my family and keep the intruders away from our safe. But as I struggled against them, I could feel my strength waning, my resolve weakening. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance. The police were on their way. With a renewed sense of determination, I redoubled my efforts to fight off the intruders, to hold them back until help arrived. But they were relentless, their attacks growing more violent and desperate with each passing moment. Just when I thought I couldn't hold on any longer, I heard the sound of footsteps on the stairs. The police had arrived. With a final burst of energy, I pushed back against the intruders, shouting for the police to hurry. And then, just like that, it was over. The intruders were subdued, handcuffed, and taken away by the police. As I looked around at the chaos and destruction that surrounded us, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. We had made it out alive, thanks to the timely intervention of the police. But as I held my wife and children close, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the air, or the knowledge that our sense of security had been shattered forever. I work as a park ranger, and part of my job is to patrol the remote areas of the woods, making sure everything is okay and keeping an eye out for any signs of trouble. Most of the time, it's pretty quiet out there, just the sounds of nature and the occasional hiker passing through. But one day, while I was out on patrol, I stumbled upon something that sent chills down my spine. I found a hidden clearing deep in the woods, adorned with strange symbols and artifacts scattered around the ground. At first, I thought it might just be some kind of prank or something, but the more I looked around, the more I realized that this was something much more sinister. The symbols were like nothing I'd ever seen before, and they seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. I tried to brush it off and tell myself that it was just some kids messing around, but deep down, I knew there was something more going on here. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a dark cloud. I decided to investigate further, to see if I could find any clues as to who might be responsible for this. As I searched the clearing, I stumbled upon a hidden entrance to a cave, obscured by thick brush and vines. I hesitated for a moment, unsure if I should go inside, but curiosity got the better of me. I had to know what was lurking in the darkness, what secrets this cave might hold. I cautiously made my way inside, my flashlight cutting through the gloom like a beacon of light. The air was thick and heavy, and the further I went, the stronger the sense of dread grew. I soon came upon a chamber deep within the cave, lit by flickering torches and filled with the smell of incense and burning candles. It was like something out of a nightmare. Strange symbols covered the walls, and strange artifacts were scattered around the room. But what chilled me to the bone was the sound coming from the far end of the chamber, the sound of chanting, low and rhythmic, like the beating of a heart. I crept closer, careful to remain hidden in the shadows, and what I saw sent a shiver down my spine. A group of cloaked figures stood in a circle, their faces obscured by hoods, their voices raised in a strange, guttural language. I watched in horror as they performed their dark rituals, their movements fluid and graceful, like dancers in a macabre ballet. I couldn't tear my eyes away, couldn't look away from the scene unfolding before me. But then, one of the figures turned, their eyes meeting mine across the dimly lit chamber. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest, as the figure pointed a finger in my direction and uttered a single word, "Intruder." I didn't wait around to see what happened next. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing off the walls of the cave as I raced back the way I came. I didn't stop until I burst out into the blinding sunlight, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. I knew I had to report what I had seen, but part of me was afraid that no one would believe me, that they would think I was crazy or making it all up. But I had to try, had to warn someone about the danger lurking in those woods. I made my way back to the ranger station as quickly as I could, my heart still pounding in my chest, my mind reeling with the horrors I had witnessed. I stumbled through the door and practically collapsed into the nearest chair, my hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. I told my colleagues everything, about the hidden clearing, the cave, the cultists performing their dark rituals. They listened in silence, their expressions growing more and more grave with each word I spoke. When I had finished, there was a long moment of silence, broken only by the sound of our breathing. And then, one of my colleagues spoke up, their voice low and serious. "We need to investigate this further," they said. "We can't let whatever's happening out there continue unchecked." And so, we gathered our gear and set out into the woods once more, determined to uncover the truth behind the hidden clearing and put an end to whatever dark forces were at work there. It was a dangerous mission, fraught with peril at every turn, but we pressed on, driven by a sense of duty and a desire to protect those who might stumble upon the cult's dark rituals. In the end, we were able to shut down the cult and put an end to their dark practices, but the memory of that day will haunt me forever. I've seen things out there in the woods that I can't explain, things that still keep me up at night, staring into the darkness and wondering what else might be lurking out there, waiting to be discovered. My name's Afia, and I'm a 24-year-old student from New York. My life's pretty boring usually, and I had dug myself into a hole of not going out and being a recluse. So, here's the deal. My friend invited me for a weekend camp in the woods. He's really into the whole naturist thing, you know, being all free and comfortable without clothes. At first, I was a bit hesitant, but I figured, why not? It could be a fun experience, right? So, we head out into the woods, just me and him and a few other folks who are into the whole naturist lifestyle. The first few days are great, actually. It's kind of liberating, being out there in nature without a care in the world. I start to feel more comfortable with it, you know, being naked and all. It's like shedding all your worries and just being one with nature. But then, things take a turn for the worse. It's midweek, and I'm out for a walk by myself, just enjoying the peace and quiet of the woods. That's when I see them, two men, lurking in the shadows, watching me with hungry eyes. I freeze, my heart pounding in my chest, my mind racing with fear. I know I should run, should get the hell out of there as fast as I can. But something keeps me rooted to the spot, like I'm hypnotized by their gaze. They start to approach me, their footsteps echoing through the silent forest. I can see the hunger in their eyes, the way they look at me like I'm some kind of prey. I try to call out for help, to scream for my friend or anyone else who might be nearby. But my voice catches in my throat, choked off by fear and panic. I'm backed into a corner, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I can feel their hot breath on my skin, their hands reaching out to grab me. But then, out of nowhere, I hear a voice of my friend, calling out to me from somewhere in the distance. It's like a lifeline, pulling me back from the brink of disaster. I find my voice again, screaming for help as loud as I can. And just like that, the two men disappear into the shadows, melting away like they were never there. My friend finds me a few moments later, shaken but unarmed. He helps me back to camp, where we alert the authorities and get the hell out of there as fast as we can. It's a terrifying experience, one that I'll never forget as long as I live. But I'm grateful to be alive, to have escaped from those two men and their sinister intentions. I don't know what would have happened if my friend hadn't shown up when he did. It was supposed to be a fun camping trip with my friends, a chance to escape the hustle and bustle of city life and immerse ourselves in the tranquility of nature. Little did we know, our adventure would take a dark turn that none of us could have anticipated. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, we stumbled upon a remote hunting cabin nestled among the trees. It seemed like the perfect place to spend the night, shelter from the elements and a cozy fire to keep us warm. But as the sun began to set and the shadows lengthened, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about the cabin. There was an eerie stillness in the air, and the silence seemed to press in on us from all sides. Despite our reservations, we decided to make ourselves at home, lighting a fire in the hearth and settling down for the night. But as darkness fell and the temperature dropped, the atmosphere inside the cabin grew increasingly tense. It wasn't long before we started hearing strange noises coming from the surrounding woods, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, and the occasional distant howl. We tried to convince ourselves that it was just the wind playing tricks on us, but deep down, we knew something wasn't right. As we huddled together for warmth, a sense of dread washed over us like a wave. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that there were eyes lurking in the darkness, watching our every move. And then, just as we were about to drift off to sleep, we heard it, a low, guttural growl emanating from somewhere outside the cabin. It sent a shiver down my spine, chilling me to the core with its primal intensity. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests as we listened to the sound growing louder and closer with each passing moment. Whatever was out there, it was getting closer, and we knew we had to do something, anything, to protect ourselves. With trembling hands, we grabbed whatever makeshift weapons we could find, branches, rocks, anything that could be used to defend ourselves against whatever lurked outside. But deep down, we knew that we were no match for whatever awaited us in the darkness. As the growling grew louder, we braced ourselves for the worst, steeling our nerves for whatever horror awaited us on the other side of the cabin door. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the growling stopped, leaving us in a deafening silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. We waited, holding our breath and straining our ears for any sign of movement outside. But there was nothing, no footsteps, no rustling leaves, nothing to indicate that whatever had been stalking us was still out there. After what felt like an eternity, we mustered up the courage to peek outside, half expecting to come face to face with some unspeakable horror waiting to pounce on us from the shadows. But to our relief, there was nothing, just the empty expanse of the forest, shrouded in darkness and silence. We breathed a collective sigh of relief, grateful to have survived whatever had been lurking outside the cabin. But our sense of relief was short-lived, as we soon realized that our ordeal was far from over. As we searched the cabin for any signs of what had happened, we stumbled upon a hidden trapdoor in the floorboards, a dark, foreboding portal leading down into the depths of the earth. It was as if the cabin itself held dark secrets that were just waiting to be unearthed. With trepidation, we descended into the darkness below, our hearts pounding in our chests as we braced ourselves for whatever horrors awaited us in the depths. But what we found was beyond anything we could have imagined. The basement was filled with cages, crude, makeshift prisons designed to hold captive whatever unfortunate souls had stumbled upon the cabin before us. And as we explored further, we discovered evidence of unspeakable horrors, bloodstains on the walls, shackles bolted to the floor, and the remnants of some twisted ritual that sent chills down our spines. It was then that we realized the true nature of the cabin. It wasn't just a shelter for weary travelers, but a hunting ground for something far more sinister. And as we stood there in the darkness, surrounded by the remnants of its dark past, we knew that we had to get out, and fast. With trembling hands, we made our way back to the surface, our minds reeling with the horror of what we had seen. But as we emerged into the night air, we were met with an even greater terror, the sound of footsteps approaching from all sides, closing in on us with terrifying speed. We ran, our hearts pounding in our chests as we fled into the darkness, desperate to escape whatever horror awaited us in the forest. And as we disappeared into the night, leaving the cabin and its dark secrets behind us, we knew that we would never forget the horror of that fateful night in the woods. I booked a stay at a luxurious tropical resort, eager for some much-needed relaxation and sunshine. The pictures online promised pristine beaches, crystal-clear waters, and 5-star service, the perfect escape from the stresses of everyday life. But as soon as I arrived, I knew something was off. The staff greeted me with forced smiles, their eyes filled with a coldness that sent a shiver down my spine. I tried to brush off the feeling of unease, chalking it up to jet lag and exhaustion from the long flight. As I settled into my room, the wind outside began to pick up, the palm trees swaying ominously in the breeze. I checked the weather forecast and saw that a hurricane was heading our way, but the resort assured me that they had everything under control. But as the storm grew closer, it became clear that the resort was ill-prepared for the impending disaster. The winds howled outside, rattling the windows and sending waves crashing against the shore. And then, just as the storm reached its peak, the power went out, plunging the resort into darkness. I tried to remain calm, reminding myself that hurricanes were a common occurrence in this part of the world. But as the hours passed and the storm raged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I ventured out into the hallway, hoping to find some answers from the resort staff. But the corridors were deserted, the only sound the howling of the wind and the pounding of the rain against the roof. I made my way to the lobby, where I found a group of other guests huddled together, their faces pale with fear. They whispered in hushed tones, exchanging rumors and speculations about what was happening outside. But no one had any answers. The staff were nowhere to be found, and the phones and internet were down, cutting off all communication with the outside world. As the night wore on, the storm showed no signs of letting up. I returned to my room, feeling more anxious and isolated than ever before. And that's when I heard it, a strange scratching sound coming from outside my window. I peered outside, straining to see through the darkness and rain. And that's when I saw them, figures moving in the shadows, their eyes gleaming with a sinister light. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that the resort staff were not the only ones hiding dark secrets. The storm had brought something else with it, something far more dangerous. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. I packed my bags and made my way to the exit, praying that I could find a way to escape before it was too late. But as I stepped outside, I was met with a scene of chaos and destruction. The resort was in shambles, the buildings battered and broken by the fury of the storm. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them, the figures from before, lurking in the shadows, their eyes fixed on me with a hunger that sent a chill down my spine. I turned and ran, the sound of my footsteps drowned out by the howling of the wind. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the beach, where I collapsed in exhaustion, the sand sticking to my skin as I gasped for breath. But even as I caught my breath, I knew that my ordeal was far from over. The storm had passed, but the danger still lurked in the shadows, waiting for another opportunity to strike. I knew I had to find help, and fast. I stumbled along the beach, searching for any sign of civilization. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a boat on the horizon, its lights cutting through the darkness like a beacon of hope. I waved my arms frantically, shouting for help as the boat drew nearer. And then, finally, I saw them, the crew rushing to my aid, their faces filled with relief as they pulled me aboard. I collapsed on the deck, tears of gratitude streaming down my face as I realized that I was safe, for now, at least. But as the boat carried me away from the deserted resort, I knew it was finally over. I rented a secluded cabin in the mountains for a solo writing retreat. It seemed like the perfect getaway, just me, my thoughts, and the peaceful solitude of nature. But one night, as I sat at my desk, typing away on my laptop, I heard noises outside. At first, I dismissed them as just the sounds of the forest, the rustle of leaves, the creaking of branches in the wind. But then I heard voices, low, guttural whispers that sent a shiver down my spine. I peered out the window and saw two men lurking in the darkness, their figures illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched them approach the cabin, their movements stealthy and deliberate. They were armed. I could see the glint of metal in their hands, the cold steel of their weapons reflecting the moonlight. Panic seized me as I realized that I was in danger, that these men were not here by accident, they were here for a reason, and it wasn't to ask for directions or borrow a cup of sugar. I knew I had to act fast if I wanted to survive. With trembling hands, I grabbed a nearby lamp and switched it off, plunging the cabin into darkness. I crouched behind the sofa, trying to control my breathing as I listened to the sounds of the men outside. They were getting closer, their footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. I prayed silently for them to go away, to leave me alone and let me live to see another day. But deep down, I knew that they wouldn't stop until they found me, until they had what they came for. And then, suddenly, the door burst open with a loud crash, and the men stormed into the cabin. I pressed myself further into the shadows, holding my breath as they searched the room. My heart raced as they moved closer, their footsteps echoing off the walls of the cabin. I could hear them talking in low, hushed tones, their voices filled with menace and malice. I closed my eyes and prayed for a miracle, for some way out of this nightmare. But when I opened them again, the men were standing right in front of me, their faces twisted into sinister grins. I braced myself for the worst, but to my surprise, they didn't attack me. Instead, they seemed almost amused by my fear, as if they were toying with me, playing a cruel game of cat and mouse. I knew I had to do something, anything, to escape. With a surge of adrenaline, I leaped to my feet and dashed for the door, ignoring the shouts of the men behind me. I ran blindly through the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled over rocks and roots. I could hear the men chasing after me, their voices growing louder with each passing moment. But I refused to give up, refused to let them catch me. I pushed myself harder, running faster than I ever had before, driven by pure instinct and the desperate desire to survive. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw a glimmer of light ahead, the glow of a distant street lamp, shining like a beacon in the night. With renewed determination, I sprinted toward it, my legs burning with exertion as I raced towards safety. And finally, mercifully, I broke free of the darkness and emerged into the open air, gasping for breath as I collapsed onto the pavement. I looked around wildly, expecting to see the men closing in on me. But to my relief, they were nowhere to be seen. They had vanished into the night, leaving me alone and shaken but alive. I stumbled to my feet and staggered toward the nearest house, praying that whoever lived there would take pity on me and offer me shelter from the horrors I had just endured. And as I knocked on the door, my heart still pounding in my chest, I knew that I would never forget the terror of that night, the night when I came face to face with pure evil and lived to tell the tale. I work as a nurse at a psychiatric hospital, which is usually a pretty normal job. But one night, things got really creepy. It was during the late shift, and the hospital was quiet. I was going about my rounds, checking on the patients and making sure everything was okay. That's when I heard laughter. It was coming from one of the patient rooms, but when I went to check, there was no one there. I tried to brush it off as my imagination, but then I heard it again. It was unsettling, like someone was laughing at a joke only they understood. I decided to investigate further, so I went to the room where the laughter was coming from. When I opened the door, it was empty. But then I heard more laughter, coming from another room down the hall. I went to check it out, and again, there was no one there. At this point, I was starting to feel really uneasy. I've worked at the hospital for years, and I've never experienced anything like this before. I went back to the nurse's station and told my colleagues what I'd heard. They looked at me like I was crazy, but I could tell they were feeling nervous too. We decided to keep an eye on the patients, just in case. But as the night went on, things only got weirder. Patients who had been calm and lucid earlier in the day were now acting agitated and hysterical. They were all saying the same thing: they'd seen something in the shadows. I tried to reassure them, to tell them it was just their imagination playing tricks on them. But deep down, I knew there was something off about the whole situation. That's when I saw it, a shadow, moving across the wall. It was like nothing I'd ever seen before, dark and twisted, with glowing eyes that seemed to pierce right through me. I froze in terror, unable to move as the shadow crept closer. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. I knew I had to get out of there, so I grabbed my things and made a beeline for the door. But as I was leaving, I heard one last thing: the sound of laughter, echoing through the empty halls. I don't know what was going on at the hospital that night, but I'm sure of one thing: it was something I never want to experience again. It was just like any other night at the shopping mall where I work as a janitor. The place was quiet. The only sounds echoing through the empty corridors were the hum of fluorescent lights and the faint buzz of the security cameras. As I made my rounds, sweeping the floors and emptying the trash cans, I noticed something strange: a trail of blood leading from the parking lot to the back entrance of the building. At first, I thought it must be some kind of prank or accident, but as I followed the trail, my heart began to pound in my chest with growing unease. The blood trail led me deeper into the building, twisting and turning through the maze-like corridors until it came to an abrupt end in front of a maintenance closet. My hand shook as I reached for the door handle, my mind racing with horrifying possibilities of what I might find on the other side. But I couldn't turn back now. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside, bracing myself for the worst. What I saw inside the maintenance closet made my blood run cold. There, lying on the floor in a pool of blood, was a body, a man, his face contorted in agony, his eyes wide with fear. I stumbled back in shock, my mind reeling as I tried to process what I was seeing. It was clear that this was no accident. Someone had been brutally attacked, and the perpetrator was still out there, somewhere in the building. My first instinct was to call the police, but as I reached for my phone, a noise behind me made me freeze in place. Turning slowly, I saw a shadowy figure lurking in the darkness, their eyes gleaming with malice as they stared back at me. My heart pounding in my chest, I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. With trembling hands, I backed away from the closet, my eyes never leaving the figure in front of me. But as I turned to run, I felt something grab hold of my ankle, sending me sprawling to the ground with a cry of pain. I struggled to break free, kicking and thrashing against my unseen assailant as I fought for my life. But the figure was relentless, their grip like a vice as they dragged me back towards the maintenance closet. With every ounce of strength I had left, I screamed for help, praying that someone, anyone, would hear me and come to my rescue. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor. With a surge of adrenaline, I redoubled my efforts, kicking and screaming with renewed fervor as the footsteps drew nearer. And then, just as the figure was about to drag me into the darkness of the maintenance closet, a beam of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the corridor in front of me. It was the security guard, his face a mask of concern as he rushed towards me, his hand outstretched to help me to my feet. Together, we fled from the maintenance closet, racing through the corridors of the shopping mall as we called out for help. And then, finally, we burst through the back entrance of the building, stumbling out into the parking lot where the night air was cool and crisp. As we waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling of horror that gripped me. The memory of what I had seen in that maintenance closet burned into my mind like a brand. But despite the terror I had endured, I was alive, and for that, I was grateful. Grateful to the security guard who had come to my rescue. I stumbled upon something in my small town that I wish I hadn't. It all started innocently enough, just me going about my usual routine, running errands and grabbing coffee at the local cafe. But then one day, I saw something that made me stop dead in my tracks. I was walking past the old abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town when I saw a group of people sneaking inside. At first, I thought nothing of it, just some kids exploring or maybe some squatters looking for shelter. But then I noticed the way they were dressed, all in dark robes with hoods pulled up over their heads. My curiosity got the better of me, and I followed them inside, keeping to the shadows and trying to stay out of sight. What I saw there chilled me to the bone. There were candles flickering on every surface, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and in the center of the room, there was a circle drawn in chalk with strange symbols etched into the floor. I watched in horror as the group began to chant in a language I didn't recognize, their voices rising in intensity as they performed some kind of ritual. I wanted to run, to get as far away from there as possible, but something held me rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, they noticed me. One of them pointed in my direction, shouting something in a language I couldn't understand, and suddenly, I was surrounded. I tried to fight them off, to push my way through their ranks and escape, but there were too many of them, and they were too strong. They dragged me into the center of the circle, pinning me down as their leader stepped forward, a sinister smile playing on his lips. He whispered something in my ear, something that sent shivers down my spine, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was lying on the cold, hard ground outside the warehouse, my head spinning and my body aching all over. I stumbled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But deep down, I knew that I couldn't stay in that town any longer, not with those people out there, lurking in the shadows and waiting to strike. I packed up my things and left, putting as much distance between myself and that place as possible. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, watching and waiting for me to slip up so they can finish what they started. I was on a road trip with my friends, cruising down the open highway, the wind whipping through our hair as we laughed and joked together. We were young and carefree, with the whole world ahead of us, and nothing but adventure on our minds. But as the sun began to set and darkness fell over the landscape, we noticed something strange. There were no other cars on the road, no signs of life for miles around. It was as if we were the only people in the world, alone in the vast expanse of the desert. At first, we thought nothing of it, chalking it up to the remote location and the late hour. But as the minutes ticked by and the miles stretched on, a sense of unease began to settle over us, like a dark cloud hanging over our heads. And then, out of nowhere, we heard the roar of engines behind us, the sound growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. We glanced nervously at each other, our hearts pounding in our chests as we strained to see what was coming up behind us. And then we saw them, a line of sleek, black SUVs barreling down the highway towards us, their headlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of death. We tried to outrun them, to put as much distance between us and them as possible, but they were relentless in their pursuit, closing in on us with terrifying speed. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that we were being hunted, that these people were not out for a leisurely drive, but were instead on the hunt for prey. And we were their next target. I slammed my foot down on the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to put as much distance between us and them as possible. But no matter how fast we drove, they were always right behind us, their headlights looming closer and closer with each passing second. And then, just when I thought we couldn't run any further, one of the SUVs pulled up alongside us, forcing us off the road and into the desert. We careened off the highway and onto the sand, our tires spinning wildly as we fought to regain control of the car. But it was too late. The SUVs had us surrounded, their headlights illuminating us like deer caught in the headlights. And then, without warning, they opened fire, their bullets tearing through the air with deadly accuracy. We ducked and swerved as best we could, but there was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. We were sitting ducks, helpless against the onslaught of bullets raining down on us from all sides. With a sense of desperation, I reached for my phone, my fingers shaking as I dialed 911 and begged for help. But the line was dead, the only response a deafening silence that seemed to stretch on for eternity. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard the roar of engines behind us, the sound growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. I glanced nervously at my friends, my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that help had finally arrived. With a surge of relief, we watched as a line of police cars pulled up alongside us, their sirens blaring and their lights flashing in the darkness. The SUVs tried to flee, but they were no match for the police, who chased them down with relentless determination. As the dust settled and the adrenaline began to fade, I realized that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. We were battered and bruised, but alive, our lives spared by the quick thinking and bravery of those who had come to our rescue. As we sat there in the darkness, surrounded by the wreckage of our car and the sound of sirens wailing in the distance, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the chance to live another day. We had survived the hunt, but the memory of that night would stay with us forever. I live alone in a high-rise apartment, and lately, things have been getting strange. It all started a few weeks ago when I began receiving threatening emails from an anonymous sender. At first, I thought it was just spam or some kind of prank, but the messages quickly escalated from vague threats to specific details about my life. The emails were unnerving, filled with personal information that only someone close to me would know. They knew where I worked, where I lived, even details about my daily routine. It was like they were watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I tried to trace the emails, but every time I did, they led back to my own computer. It didn't make any sense. How could someone be sending me messages from my own email account? I changed all of my passwords, ran virus scans, even contacted the police, but there was nothing they could do. The emails kept coming, each one more menacing than the last. I felt like I was being watched, like someone was always lurking just out of sight, waiting for me to let my guard down. I started to avoid going out alone, always looking over my shoulder and jumping at the slightest sound. But no matter how careful I was, the emails kept coming, each one more threatening than the last. They knew everything about me, my fears, my weaknesses, even my deepest secrets. I began to feel like I was losing my mind, like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't focus on anything but the constant stream of messages flooding my inbox. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I started receiving packages filled with photographs, newspaper clippings, even items from my own apartment. It was like whoever was behind the emails was trying to drive me insane, to break me down until there was nothing left but fear and paranoia. I knew I had to do something, had to find out who was behind the emails before it was too late. But every time I tried to investigate, I hit a dead end. There were no clues, no leads, nothing to point me in the right direction. I was running out of options, running out of time. I felt like I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of my own fear and desperation. But then, just when I was about to give up hope, I received a breakthrough, a message from the anonymous sender, taunting me with details about my past, my family, even my childhood. It was like a slap in the face, a wake-up call that snapped me out of my despair and into action. I knew I had to confront whoever was behind the emails, had to put an end to this nightmare once and for all. I gathered up all of the evidence I had collected, all of the emails, photos, and packages, and marched down to the police station, determined to make them listen. At first, they were skeptical. dismissing my claims as the paranoid ramblings of a disturbed mind. But as I laid out the evidence before them, their expressions changed from disbelief to concern. They promised to launch a full investigation, to track down whoever was behind the emails and bring them to justice. And for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to hope that I could finally put an end to this nightmare and reclaim my life. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of the anonymous sender. The police did their best, but without any concrete leads, there was little they could do. I began to lose hope, to feel like I was fighting a losing battle against an enemy I couldn't see or touch. But then, just when I was about to give up, I received a message, not from the anonymous sender, but from the police. They had traced the emails back to an old acquaintance of mine, someone I hadn't spoken to in years. It was like a punch in the gut, a betrayal that cut me to the core. But as the shock wore off, I realized that I finally had the answers I had been searching for. I confronted the acquaintance, demanding to know why they had targeted me, why they had tried to ruin my life. And as they confessed to their crimes, I felt a sense of relief wash over me, relief that I could finally put this nightmare behind me and move on with my life. The police arrested the acquaintance, and as they were led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of closure that I hadn't felt in weeks. I knew that it would take time to heal from the trauma of the experience. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal. There's something about the unknown that draws me in, so when I got the chance to join a team of paranormal investigators on an expedition to a haunted forest, I jumped at the opportunity. We arrived at the forest just as the sun was beginning to set, the dense canopy overhead casting long shadows across the forest floor. As we unloaded our equipment and set up camp, a sense of unease settled over me, but I pushed aside my doubts and focused on the task at hand. We wasted no time in getting started, setting up our cameras and EVP recorders in strategic locations throughout the forest. As the night wore on, we took turns exploring the woods, searching for any sign of paranormal activity. But as the hours passed and our investigation turned up nothing but eerie sounds and strange shadows, I began to grow increasingly frustrated. It seemed like we were no closer to uncovering the truth than when we had first arrived. And then, just as I was about to suggest calling it a night, something strange happened. One of our cameras picked up a faint whisper, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves. We gathered around the screen, listening intently as the voice grew louder, its words becoming clearer with each passing moment. It was unlike anything I had ever heard before, guttural and otherworldly, like the voice of a creature from the depths of hell itself. And as the words echoed through the forest, a chill ran down my spine, and I knew that we were in way over our heads. But before we could react, the forest erupted into chaos. Shadows darted through the trees, and strange lights danced in the darkness, illuminating twisted shapes that seemed to shift and warp with each passing moment. We scrambled to pack up our equipment, our hearts pounding in our chests as we fought to escape the forest. But no matter how fast we ran, the shadows seemed to follow, their twisted forms closing in around us as we stumbled through the underbrush. I could hear the panicked shouts of my teammates echoing through the trees, their voices filled with fear and desperation. But I dared not look back, knowing that whatever was chasing us was gaining ground with each passing moment. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we burst out of the forest into the open air, gasping for breath as we stumbled into the clearing. We collapsed onto the ground, our bodies trembling with exhaustion and relief as we looked back at the dark wall of trees that loomed behind us. As the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, we knew that we had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. And as we made our way back to civilization, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had stumbled upon something far more terrifying than we had ever imagined. But one thing was for certain, we would never venture into that forest again. I'm a seasoned mountaineer, and I've faced some tough challenges in my time. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened on my solo expedition in the snowy woods. I set out on a clear morning, the crisp mountain air filling my lungs as I trudged through the fresh powder. The snow was deep, but I was confident in my skills and eager to tackle the wilderness on my own. As the day wore on, the weather took a turn for the worse. Dark clouds rolled in, blotting out the sun and plunging the forest into a gray twilight. I pushed on, determined to reach my destination before the storm hit. But as the snow began to fall in earnest, I realized that I was in for more than I bargained for. The blizzard descended quickly, the wind whipping through the trees with a ferocity that made it hard to see more than a few feet in front of me. I tried to keep my bearings, but the swirling snow disoriented me, and before long, I realized that I was hopelessly lost. Panic set in as I struggled to find my way, my heart pounding in my chest as I fought against the biting cold and the relentless wind. I stumbled through the woods, my boots sinking into the deep snow with each step, my hands numb with cold as I clutched my map and compass. But no matter which way I turned, I couldn't seem to find my way out of the forest. The trees loomed overhead like dark sentinels, their branches twisted and gnarled in the gloom. Hours passed, but it felt like an eternity as I battled against the elements, my energy waning with each passing moment. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I spotted a faint light through the trees. It was a small cabin, nestled in a clearing just ahead. Relief flooded through me as I stumbled toward the cabin, my limbs heavy with exhaustion as I pushed open the door and stumbled inside. The cabin was small and dimly lit, but it offered shelter from the storm, and that was all that mattered. I collapsed onto the floor, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to warm my frozen limbs by the fire. But as I lay there, trying to regain my strength, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. There was a sense of unease in the air, a feeling of being watched that sent shivers down my spine. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself that it was just my imagination running wild in the midst of the storm. But deep down, I knew that something wasn't right. As the night wore on, the feeling of unease only grew stronger. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a jolt of fear through me, and I found myself jumping at shadows in the darkness. But despite my fear, I knew that I couldn't stay in the cabin forever. I needed to find my way back to safety, no matter what it took. With a sense of determination, I forced myself to my feet, my muscles protesting with every step as I made my way to the door. But as I reached for the handle, I froze. There was a sound outside, a soft scraping noise that sent a chill down my spine. I hesitated, my hand hovering inches from the door as I listened intently. And then, without warning, the scraping stopped, replaced by a deafening silence that seemed to echo through the cabin. For a moment, I stood there, unsure of what to do. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and stepped outside, ready to face whatever lay beyond. But to my surprise, there was nothing there. The clearing was empty, the storm still raging overhead as I stood alone in the darkness. Confused and more than a little shaken, I retreated back inside the cabin, locking the door behind me as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. But despite my best efforts, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that there was something out there in the darkness, waiting for me to let my guard down. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was in more danger than I had ever imagined. And as the storm raged on outside, I knew that I would have to summon every ounce of courage and determination to make it out of the woods alive. As I huddled inside the cabin, the storm raged on outside, the wind howling like a pack of wolves and the snow piling up against the windows. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but the thought of venturing out into the darkness filled me with dread. I tried to keep myself busy, stoking the fire and rationing what little food I had left. But every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond the walls, waiting for me to make a move. Hours passed, the darkness outside seemingly impenetrable as I waited for the storm to pass. But as the night dragged on, I realized that I couldn't stay cooped up in the cabin forever. With a deep breath, I made the decision to venture out into the cold, hoping against hope that I could find my way back to safety. Bracing myself against the biting wind, I stepped outside, the snow crunching beneath my boots as I trudged through the deep drifts. For hours, I stumbled through the forest, my hands numb with cold as I clutched my map and compass, praying for a glimpse of familiar landmarks. But as the storm raged on, it became increasingly clear that I was hopelessly lost. The trees loomed overhead like silent sentinels, their branches laden with snow as they swayed in the wind. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I spotted a faint light through the trees. It was a beacon of hope in the darkness, and I stumbled toward it with renewed determination. As I drew closer, I realized that it was a cabin, much like the one I had sought shelter in earlier. But this one seemed different somehow, more inviting, and I felt a surge of relief flood through me as I approached the door. I knocked tentatively, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for a response. And then, to my surprise, the door swung open, revealing a warm, welcoming glow from within. Relief flooded through me as I stepped inside, the warmth of the fire washing over me like a wave. The cabin was small but cozy, and I collapsed onto the floor, overcome with exhaustion as I allowed myself to relax for the first time in what felt like an eternity. As I lay there, basking in the warmth of the fire, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the stroke of luck that had led me here. I was stranded on the side of a deserted highway in the Midwest, the sun sinking low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty road. With no cars in sight and no sign of civilization for miles, I felt a growing sense of desperation gnawing at the pit of my stomach. As the hours passed and the sky darkened, I began to worry that I might be stuck out here all night, vulnerable to whatever dangers lurked in the darkness. But just as I was starting to lose hope, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the silence, filling me with a sense of relief. I stuck out my thumb and prayed for the best as the headlights of a truck came into view, growing larger and larger with each passing second. The truck slowed to a stop beside me, and I felt a rush of gratitude towards the driver for offering me a ride. But as I climbed into the cab and settled into the passenger seat, a wave of unease washed over me. There was something about the trucker's demeanor that set off alarm bells in my mind, a sense of menace lurking beneath his friendly smile. I tried to shake off my instincts and focus on the road ahead, but the feeling of unease lingered, growing stronger with each passing mile. I couldn't put my finger on exactly what it was that made me so uncomfortable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in danger. As we drove deeper into the night, the trucker's behavior became increasingly erratic, his laughter growing louder and more manic with each passing minute. I tried to keep up a polite conversation, but his responses grew increasingly nonsensical, leaving me feeling more unsettled than ever. I began to regret ever accepting a ride from this stranger, but there was no turning back now. I was at his mercy, hurtling down the highway at breakneck speed with no idea where we were headed or what he had planned for me. Just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the trucker suddenly veered off the highway and onto a deserted dirt road, his eyes glinting with madness as he turned to face me. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that I was completely at his mercy, alone and vulnerable in the middle of nowhere. I knew that I had to get out of there, to escape from this madman before it was too late. With a surge of adrenaline, I flung open the door and leaped from the truck, hitting the ground running as I sprinted into the darkness. I could hear the trucker's shouts behind me as I fled into the night, his footsteps echoing in the empty air as he pursued me with single-minded determination. But I refused to look back, refused to let fear consume me as I raced towards the safety of civilization. I ran for what felt like hours, my lungs burning and my legs aching with exhaustion, but I refused to stop until I was certain that I was out of danger. And finally, just when I thought I couldn't run another step, I saw the welcoming glow of streetlights ahead, signaling that help was within reach. With one last burst of energy, I pushed myself forward, my heart pounding in my chest as I stumbled into the safety of a nearby gas station. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath as I realized that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As I waited for the police to arrive, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I hadn't managed to escape from the trucker's clutches. But one thing was for certain, I would never hitchhike again. I was out in the hills of Laos, doing fieldwork as a geologist. It was just another day, until I stumbled upon this well. It looked ordinary enough at first glance, just a hole in the ground surrounded by rocks. But there was something about it that drew me in, something that whispered of secrets hidden in its depths. As I peered into the darkness of the well, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than met the eye. I had heard rumors of a tragic legend surrounding the well, tales of a cursed spirit that haunted its waters. But I didn't believe in such things. I was a man of science, after all. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate further. I lowered a flashlight into the well, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. What I saw sent a chill down my spine. The walls of the well were covered in strange markings, symbols that seemed to writhe and twist in the dim light. As I studied the markings, a sense of unease washed over me. It was like they were alive, pulsing with a malevolent energy that seemed to seep into my very bones. I tried to shake off the feeling, but it clung to me like a shadow, growing stronger with each passing moment. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me, soft and melodic, like the whisper of the wind through the trees. I turned, expecting to see another hiker or perhaps a local villager. But there was no one there, only the empty expanse of the hills stretching out before me. Shaken but undeterred, I turned back to the well, determined to unravel its mysteries. But as I reached out to touch the markings on the wall, a cold wind swept through the clearing, extinguishing my flashlight and plunging me into darkness. Panic gripped me as I fumbled in the darkness, searching for my flashlight. But before I could find it, I felt something brush against my leg, something cold and clammy, like the touch of a long-dead hand. I recoiled in horror, scrambling backwards in a desperate attempt to escape. But it was too late. Something had me in its grasp, pulling me inexorably towards the well. I thrashed and struggled, but it was like trying to fight against the tide. I could feel myself being dragged closer and closer to the gaping maw of the well, the darkness swallowing me whole. Just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard a voice calling out to me from the darkness. It was faint at first, like a distant echo, but it grew louder and clearer with each passing moment. It was the voice of a woman, soft and soothing, like a beacon of light in the darkness. With renewed strength, I reached out towards the voice, grasping desperately for something, anything, to hold on to. And then, miraculously, I felt a hand close around mine, pulling me back from the brink. It was a local villager, drawn by the sound of my struggles. Together, we fought against the unseen force that sought to claim me, inch by inch, until finally, with one last desperate push, I broke free from its grasp. Gasping for breath, I collapsed to the ground, my heart pounding in my chest. The villager helped me to my feet, his eyes wide with fear and disbelief. He told me of the tragic legend surrounding the well, of the countless souls that had been claimed by its depths over the years. And as I looked back at the well, now nothing more than a dark hole in the ground, I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. With trembling hands, I thanked the villager for saving my life and stumbled back towards civilization, vowing never to return to those cursed hills again. I'm an avid hiker, always seeking new trails and adventures in the great outdoors. So when my friends and I stumbled upon an abandoned mine hidden deep in the forest, we were intrigued. The entrance was overgrown with vines and moss, hinting at years of neglect. Despite the warning signs, we couldn't resist the urge to explore. With our flashlights in hand, we descended into the darkness, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. As we delved deeper into the mine, a sense of unease settled over us. The walls were damp and slick with moisture, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. We stumbled upon old mining equipment scattered throughout the tunnels, rusted and broken from years of disuse. It was clear that this mine had been abandoned long ago, its secrets buried deep within its dark depths. But as we explored further, we began to uncover evidence of a horrific tragedy that had occurred there years ago. We found old newspaper clippings and photographs detailing the story of a mining accident that had claimed the lives of dozens of workers. The more we learned, the more our sense of dread grew. It seemed that the mine was cursed, haunted by the ghosts of those who had lost their lives within its walls. As we pressed on, determined to uncover the truth, we heard strange noises echoing through the tunnels. It sounded like whispers, faint and barely audible above the sound of our footsteps. Fear gripped us as we realized that we were not alone in the mine. Something was watching us from the shadows, its presence lurking just out of sight. With a sense of urgency, we tried to find our way out of the mine, but the tunnel seemed to twist and turn endlessly, leading us further into the darkness. Suddenly, without warning, the mine began to shake violently, the ground trembling beneath our feet. Panic surged through us as we realized that the mine was collapsing around us. With no time to spare, we ran as fast as we could, dodging falling rocks and debris as we scrambled towards the entrance. It was a race against time, with death hot on our heels. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a narrow shaft leading to the surface. With a final burst of energy, we climbed towards the light, emerging from the mine, leaving the horror behind us. I hopped onto the night bus, eager to visit a friend. It was late, and the bus was mostly empty, except for a few other passengers scattered throughout the seats. As I settled into my seat, I noticed a man in a hooded jacket sitting in the back of the bus, his gaze fixed on me. There was something about the way he looked at me that sent a chill down my spine. His eyes were cold and calculating, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching my every move. I tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the passing scenery outside the window. But no matter how hard I tried to look away, I could feel his eyes boring into me, like daggers piercing through my soul. As the bus rumbled on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. The man in the hooded jacket seemed to be getting closer, his presence looming over me like a dark cloud. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew that something was seriously wrong. There was a sense of danger in the air, a feeling that I couldn't shake no matter how hard I tried. Then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the man stood up and began to make his way towards me. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was alone with him on the empty bus, with no one around to help me if things turned violent. I tried to stay calm, telling myself that I was overreacting. But the man's gaze was like a weight pressing down on me, suffocating me with fear. As he got closer, I could see the glint of something metallic in his hand. My heart raced as I realized that he was armed, and I was completely at his mercy. I knew that I had to get off the bus, to escape before it was too late. With trembling hands, I pressed the button to signal the driver to stop, praying that he would hear me and come to my rescue. The bus screeched to a halt, and I wasted no time in jumping off and sprinting away as fast as I could. But to my horror, I realized that the man was following me, his footsteps echoing in the darkness behind me. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to put as much distance between us as possible. But but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was gaining on me. Then, just when I thought I couldn't run any further, a passing car pulled up beside me. Relief washed over me as I saw the driver step out, a look of concern on his face as he rushed to my aid. I told him what had happened, my words tumbling out in a rush as I struggled to catch my breath. He listened intently, his eyes narrowing with anger as he realized what had happened. Together, we called the police and reported the incident, and they arrived on the scene just in time to apprehend the man. As I watched him being led away in handcuffs, a sense of relief washed over me. Setting up the tent was a bit of a hassle, but we managed to get it done before the sun went down. The air was cool and the stars were shining bright overhead. It felt peaceful and romantic. We made a fire and roasted marshmallows, reminiscing about our years together. But as the night wore on, I started to feel uneasy. It was like there was something lurking in the shadows, watching us. When we crawled into our sleeping bags and zipped up the tent for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig outside made my heart race. Suddenly, we heard strange noises coming from outside the tent. It sounded like footsteps, slow and deliberate, crunching on the forest floor. My wife gripped my arm, her eyes wide with fear. We held our breath, listening intently as the footsteps drew closer and closer. I wanted to peek outside and see what was out there, but I was too scared to move. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the footsteps stopped right outside our tent. I could hear someone breathing heavily, their breath fogging up the fabric of the tent. My wife and I huddled together, trying to make ourselves as small as possible. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, drowning out all other sound. Then, without warning, the intruder spoke. Their voice was low and menacing, sending shivers down my spine. They taunted us, telling us they knew we were in there and that there was nowhere for us to hide. They said they had been watching us for hours, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized we were completely at their mercy. I didn't know what they wanted from us or why they were tormenting us like this. We stayed silent, hoping that if we didn't respond, they would go away. But they just laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the night. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, they were gone. The footsteps faded into the distance, leaving behind an eerie silence. My wife and I stayed awake the rest of the night, too scared to sleep. Every little sound made us jump, convinced that the intruder had returned to finish what they had started. When morning finally came, we packed up our things and left the campground behind us, vowing never to return. I work at a clothing store, and I never expected to stumble upon something like this. It's a normal day, just like any other, and I'm going about my usual routine, straightening racks, folding clothes, helping customers find what they need. But then, as I'm tidying up the fitting rooms, I notice something strange, a small camera hidden behind a stack of clothes. At first, I think it must be a mistake, some kind of mix-up with the inventory or the security system. But as I take a closer look, I realize that it's no mistake. This camera has been deliberately placed here, hidden from view, with the sole purpose of capturing customers' private moments without their knowledge or consent. My heart sinks as I realize the gravity of what I've discovered. Someone has been spying on our customers, invading their privacy and violating their trust in the most despicable way possible. I know that I need to do something, to take action and put a stop to this before it goes any further. But as I try to wrap my head around what's happening, I can't shake the feeling of unease that gnaws at the pit of my stomach. Who could have done something like this? And why? The questions swirl around in my mind as I try to piece together the puzzle, but there are no easy answers, no obvious suspects. I decide to take matters into my own hands and confront the store manager about what I've found. They're shocked and appalled by the revelation, and we agree to launch an investigation to uncover the identity of the perpetrator. But as we delve deeper into the mystery, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me, lurking in the shadows and waiting to strike. I start to notice strange things happening, items going missing, strange noises in the store after hours. I try to brush it off as just my imagination running wild, but deep down, I know that something isn't right. And then, one day, I receive a chilling message, a video clip, showing me going about my daily routine in the store, unaware that I'm being watched. I feel sick to my stomach as I watch the footage, realizing that I've become a target myself. Whoever is behind this knows about my investigation, knows that I'm trying to uncover the truth, and they're determined to stop me at any cost. I try to stay vigilant, to keep a close eye on my surroundings and watch for any signs of danger. But the fear gnaws at me, eating away at my sanity as I struggle to make sense of what's happening. And then, one night, as I'm closing up the store, I hear the sound of footsteps echoing in the empty corridors, growing steadily closer with each passing moment. My heart pounds in my chest as I realize that I'm not alone, that someone or something is lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike. I try to stay calm, to convince myself that it's just a trick of the mind, but deep down, I know that it's not. I can feel the presence of something malevolent, something sinister, lurking just beyond the edge of my perception. I hurry to lock up the store and make my way towards the exit, but the footsteps grow louder, closer, until they're practically right behind me. I can feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I quicken my pace, my heart racing with fear and uncertainty. And then, just as I reach the door, I feel a hand grab hold of my shoulder, pulling me back with a strength that sends me sprawling to the ground. I look up to see a shadowy figure looming over me, their face obscured by the dim light as they reach for me with outstretched hands. I scramble to my feet and race towards the exit, my breath ragged and my heart pounding in my chest. I can hear the figure chasing after me, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors as they close in on me with each passing moment. But just as I reach the door, I feel a searing pain in my side, followed by a wave of darkness that washes over me like a tidal wave. My vision blurs and swims as I struggle to stay conscious, my legs giving out beneath me as I collapse to the ground. And then, everything goes black. As I collapse to the ground, the pain in my side intensifies, threatening to overwhelm me. I can hear the figure closing in, their footsteps growing louder with each passing moment. Desperation floods through me as I realize I'm running out of time. Summoning every ounce of strength left in me, I force myself to push up from the ground and stagger towards the exit. Adrenaline courses through my veins, numbing the pain and fueling my determination to escape. With one final burst of effort, I throw open the door and stumble out into the night, the cold air hitting me like a slap in the face. I stagger blindly through the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I try to put as much distance between myself and the store as possible. Behind me, I can hear the figure cursing and shouting, their voice filled with rage and frustration. But I don't dare look back, knowing that if I do, it might be the last thing I ever see. I keep running, my heart pounding in my chest as I race through the empty streets, each step bringing me closer to safety. And then, finally, I see the glow of streetlights in the distance, the promise of civilization and safety just beyond reach. With a surge of relief, I push myself to keep going, my legs burning with exertion as I push through the pain and exhaustion. And then, just when I think I can't go on any longer, I see the flashing lights of a police car coming to a stop just ahead. I collapse to the ground, my body trembling with exhaustion and relief as the officers rush to my side. They ask me what happened, but all I can do is gasp for breath and point back towards the store, where the figure still lurks in the shadows, their face twisted into a mask of rage and frustration. The officers move in to apprehend the figure, their voices stern and commanding as they order them to surrender. But the figure refuses to go quietly, lashing out with a violence that sends shivers down my spine. I watch in horror as the officers struggle to subdue the figure, their shouts and cries echoing through the night as they fight tooth and nail for control. And then, finally, they manage to overpower them, dragging them away in handcuffs as I watch from the safety of the sidewalk. As the adrenaline fades and the reality of what just happened sinks in, I feel a wave of exhaustion wash over me, threatening to pull me under. But I know that I'm safe now, that I made it out alive, and that's all that matters. I'm shaken and bruised, but I'm alive, and for that, I'm grateful. And as I watch the police car drive away into the night, carrying the figure off to face justice, I realize the nightmare is finally over, and I'm free. We had found a quaint bed and breakfast nestled in the countryside, promising peace and serenity amidst the rolling hills and lush greenery. As we drove up the long, winding driveway, the sky darkened ominously, and the first drops of rain splattered against the windshield. I felt a sense of unease creeping over me, but I brushed it off as just nerves from the impending storm. The bed and breakfast looked charming from the outside, with its cozy exterior and warm, inviting lights glowing in the windows. We parked the car and hurried inside, eager to escape the rain and settle into our room for the night. But as soon as we stepped through the door, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something off about the place, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. The air felt heavy and oppressive, and a sense of foreboding hung in the air like a thick fog. We were greeted by the owners, a middle-aged couple with forced smiles and steely eyes. They showed us to our room, a dimly lit space with creaky floorboards and musty curtains. As we unpacked our bags, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced out the window and saw the owners lingering in the hallway, their expressions unreadable as they whispered to each other in hushed tones. I tried to push aside my paranoia and focus on enjoying our time together, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger as the night wore on. The storm raged outside, the wind howling and the rain pounding against the roof like a relentless drumbeat. That's when we heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing down the hallway, slow and deliberate. My partner and I exchanged nervous glances, our hearts pounding in our chests as we strained to listen for any more sounds. But the footsteps stopped abruptly, leaving us in an eerie silence that seemed to stretch on forever. I wanted to believe that it was just our imagination playing tricks on us, but deep down, I knew that something was terribly wrong. We tried to convince ourselves that we were just being paranoid, that there was a rational explanation for everything that was happening. But as the night wore on, the sense of dread only grew stronger, until it felt like a suffocating weight pressing down on us from all sides. Then, just as we were about to drift off to sleep, we heard a loud crash from downstairs, followed by the sound of shattering glass. My partner and I leapt out of bed, our hearts racing as we rushed to investigate. We found the owners in the kitchen, their faces pale and drawn as they stood over a broken window. They muttered something about a fallen tree limb, but their eyes darted nervously around the room, betraying their fear. I wanted to believe their explanation, to trust that everything was okay, but a nagging voice in the back of my mind told me otherwise. There was something about the way they looked at us, something sinister lurking behind their forced smiles and polite demeanor. As the storm raged on outside, my partner and I huddled together in our room, too afraid to sleep and too afraid to leave. We listened intently for any more sounds, but the night was eerily quiet, save for the occasional clap of thunder in the distance. Hours passed, and still, we heard nothing. It was as if the world outside had ceased to exist, leaving us alone in the darkness with our fears and suspicions. But just when we thought we were safe, we heard the sound of footsteps once again, this time coming from inside the house. My partner and I froze, our breath catching in our throats as we waited for whatever was out there to reveal itself. And then, suddenly, the door burst open, and the owners stood before us, their faces twisted in madness as they lunged towards us with outstretched hands. We screamed and fought back, our hearts pounding in our chests as we struggled to escape their grasp. But in a stroke of luck, my partner managed to break free from their grip. With adrenaline coursing through our veins, we dashed towards the nearest window, smashing it open with a nearby chair. Without looking back, we climbed through the shattered glass and tumbled onto the wet ground outside. The storm raged on around us, but we didn't care. We ran as fast as our legs could carry us, desperate to put as much distance between us and that nightmare as possible. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, where we collapsed in exhaustion and called the police. They arrived soon after, their expressions grave as we told them about our harrowing ordeal. The authorities launched an investigation into the bed and breakfast and its owners, uncovering a string of disturbing revelations. It turned out that the couple had been luring unsuspecting travelers to their remote location for years, using them as pawns in their twisted games. We were lucky to have escaped with our lives, but the memories of that night would haunt us forever. We vowed never to speak of it again, to bury the trauma deep within our hearts and move on with our lives. But even now, years later, I can't stop the feeling of dread that washes over me whenever I think about that night. The move to our new cottage in the countryside was supposed to be the start of our happily ever after. The place looked straight out of a fairy tale with its quaint exterior and lush surroundings. We were excited to begin our life together in such a picturesque setting. At first, everything seemed perfect. The neighbors welcomed us warmly, offering baked goods and friendly smiles. But as we settled in, we started noticing strange things. One evening, as I was unpacking boxes in the attic, I found a stack of old newspapers hidden beneath a floorboard. The headlines were unsettling, filled with stories of disappearances and unsolved mysteries in the village. I brushed it off as sensationalism, but it planted a seed of unease in my mind. As we got to know our neighbors better, we realized there was an air of secrecy surrounding them. They were polite enough, but there was something off about their smiles, something insincere in their greetings. One neighbor in particular, Mr. Jenkins, gave me the creeps. He had a permanent leer on his face, and his eyes seemed to follow us wherever we went. Whenever we crossed paths, he would nod in greeting, but his gaze lingered a little too long, sending shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore my growing unease, chalking it up to nerves and unfamiliar surroundings. But then strange things started happening around the cottage. One night, we heard footsteps outside our bedroom window. When I went to investigate, I found muddy footprints leading away from the house, disappearing into the darkness. I told myself it was just a wandering animal, but deep down, I knew it was something more sinister. The incidents became more frequent as time went on. Objects would go missing, only to turn up in strange places days later. We would hear whispers in the dead of night, faint voices carrying on the wind. I confided in my husband, but he brushed off my concerns, insisting it was just my imagination running wild. He didn't want to entertain the idea that something was wrong, preferring to believe we were safe in our new home. But I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. I started avoiding our neighbors, avoiding eye contact and making excuses to stay indoors. I didn't trust them, didn't want to be around them any longer than necessary. Then one day, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. I was rummaging through a box in the garage when I found a stack of old photographs hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. They were faded and yellowed with age, but as I flipped through them, I felt a chill grip my heart. The photographs were of our neighbors, but they weren't smiling and waving like they had been when we first met. They were standing in a circle, their faces twisted with malice as they stared into the camera with cold, dead eyes. I showed the photographs to my husband, hoping he would finally take me seriously. But instead of being concerned, he laughed it off, dismissing the photographs as a prank or a misunderstanding. I knew then that I was on my own. I couldn't rely on my husband to protect me, couldn't trust anyone in this village to have my back. I had to find out the truth on my own, no matter the cost. I started doing some digging, asking around town and doing research online. The more I uncovered, the more terrified I became. It turned out that our neighbors had a dark secret, one that had been buried for years beneath the facade of small-town charm. They were part of a cult, a group of people who believed in dark rituals and ancient gods. I couldn't believe it at first, couldn't wrap my head around the idea that the people living next door were capable of such evil. But the evidence was undeniable, and I knew I had to get out before it was too late. I tried to convince my husband to leave, but he refused to listen, insisting that I was overreacting and letting my imagination run wild. He didn't want to believe that the people we had trusted were capable of such horrors. In the end, I had no choice but to leave him behind and escape on my own. I packed a bag and slipped out in the dead of night, leaving behind everything I had ever known in search of safety. I'm just a trucker, plain and simple. Been on the road for what feels like forever, hauling loads across the southeast. You get used to the long hours and the hum of the engine. But there was this one night, a few years back, that still sends shivers down my spine. I was driving through the back roads of Georgia when my rig decided to call it quits. Just died on me, middle of nowhere. No cell phone signal, just the darkness and the sound of crickets. So, there I was, stuck in the middle of the southern wilderness, praying for a miracle. I managed to find a spot with a weak signal, just enough to call for roadside assistance. They promised someone would be out to help, but the ETA was a mystery. With nothing else to do, I sat in my truck, surrounded by the oppressive quiet of the night. Eventually, headlights appeared in the distance. Relief washed over me as the tow truck pulled up. The guy driving it was a burly fella, wearing a stained uniform that looked like it had seen better days. But beggars can't be choosers, right? He introduced himself as Roy, the local mechanic. Looked like he hadn't seen a good night's sleep in years. We exchanged a few words, and he got to work on my rig. As he tinkered around, I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right. The air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, but the skies were clear. Roy mumbled to himself, occasionally shooting me a glance that made my skin crawl. He seemed nervous, jittery even. I chalked it up to the pressure of fixing a stranded truck in the dead of night. But as he worked, the atmosphere shifted from uneasy to downright sinister. I asked him how long it would take, and he replied with a vague, just a little longer, almost done. But the shadows danced around him, and his eyes held a glint of something malevolent. It was then that I noticed a toolbox by his side, filled with tools that seemed a little too sharp, a little too menacing. The minutes turned into an eternity, and Roy's movements became more erratic. He kept glancing towards the woods, as if expecting someone or something. My instincts were on high alert, telling me that I needed to get out of there, but my truck was still in pieces, and the southern night held me captive. Suddenly, Roy stood up, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes, once avoiding mine, locked onto me with an intensity that sent chills down my spine. He muttered something about needing to check something under the truck and gestured for me to step out. As I reluctantly got out of my truck, I noticed the isolation of the place. No other cars on the road, no signs of civilization. The dim glow of the tow truck's headlights was the only source of light in that sea of darkness. Roy crouched down, pretending to inspect the undercarriage. That's when it hit me. This was a trap. There was no breakdown. My truck had been sabotaged. Panic surged through me as I realized I was alone in the dark with a mechanic who had sinister intentions. I took a step back, my mind racing for a plan. Roy, sensing my unease, stood up with a twisted grin. In that moment, instinct took over, and I bolted into the woods. The night swallowed me whole as I sprinted through the thick foliage, each step echoing with the pounding of my heart. I heard Roy shouting behind me, his threats slicing through the night air. My lungs burned, but fear fueled my legs. Branches scratched at my face, and the uneven ground threatened to trip me, but I didn't dare look back. Eventually, I stumbled onto a road, and distant headlights signaled the approach of another vehicle. I flagged it down, breathless and terrified. The driver, a kind soul, offered to call the police and help me get to safety. As we drove away, I glanced back, half expecting Roy to emerge from the shadows. The police arrived, and I explained everything, the breakdown, the mechanic with a sinister plan. They assured me they'd look into it, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Roy's malevolence ran deeper than that dark southern night. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway, just my family and I, escaping the hustle and bustle of city life for a few days of relaxation in the great outdoors. We had packed up our camping gear and headed out to a remote forest, eager to spend some quality time together under the stars. But as we settled into our campsite and started to unwind, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, devoid of the usual sounds of wildlife that you would expect to hear in such a remote location. As night fell and darkness descended over the forest, that feeling of unease only grew stronger. I found myself constantly scanning the trees, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, watching us from afar. And then, in the blink of an eye, my worst fears were realized. My younger sister disappeared from the campsite without a trace, leaving behind nothing but an empty sleeping bag and a sense of dread that hung heavy in the air. Panic surged through me as I called out her name, my voice echoing through the silent forest. But there was no response, no sign of her anywhere in the darkness. With my heart pounding in my chest, I knew that I had to find her, no matter what it took. Ignoring the protests of my family, I grabbed a flashlight and set out into the forest, determined to bring my sister back to safety. The forest seemed to stretch out endlessly before me, the trees looming over me like silent sentinels guarding some dark secret hidden in their depths. I stumbled through the underbrush, my flashlight casting long shadows that danced eerily in the darkness. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig beneath my feet sent shivers down my spine, as if the forest itself was alive and watching my every move. But I pushed on, my determination to find my sister overriding my fear. As I searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, lurking just out of sight in the darkness. I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, heard strange noises echoing through the trees, but every time I turned to look, there was nothing there. Hours passed as I stumbled through the forest, calling out my sister's name until my throat was raw and my voice hoarse. But still, there was no sign of her, no clue as to where she might have gone. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, I stumbled upon a clearing deep in the heart of the forest. And there, in the center of the clearing, I saw her, a figure huddled on the ground, her face streaked with tears as she stared up at me with wide, frightened eyes. With a cry of relief, I rushed to her side, gathering her into my arms and holding her close. She was trembling with fear, her whole body shaking as she clung to me as if her life depended on it. I asked her what had happened, where she had been all this time, but she could only sob incoherently, her words lost in a tangle of fear and confusion. As we sat there in the clearing, the darkness pressing in around us. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. I glanced around nervously, my senses on high alert as I scanned the trees for any sign of danger. And then, just as suddenly as she had disappeared, my sister whispered something that sent a chill down my spine. She said that she had seen something in the forest, something dark and twisted, lurking just beyond the edge of the clearing. I felt a cold knot of fear form in the pit of my stomach as I realized that we were not alone out here, that there was something else in the forest with us, something sinister and malevolent that wanted us dead. With a sinking feeling, I knew that we had to get out of there, to leave the forest behind and never look back. But as we turned to leave, a voice called out from the darkness, a voice that sent ice water running through my veins. It was a man's voice, cold and cruel, filled with a malice that made my blood run cold. And as I turned to look, I saw him emerging from the shadows, a figure dressed in dark clothing, his face twisted into a grotesque mask of hatred and rage. I knew then that we were in danger, that this man meant us harm and would stop at nothing to see us dead. With my sister clinging to my side, I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced through the forest, desperate to escape the nightmare that had engulfed us. Behind me, I could hear the man's footsteps echoing through the darkness, growing closer with every passing moment. I urged my sister to run faster, to keep moving no matter what, as we plunged deeper into the heart of the forest. But no matter how fast we ran, the man was always right behind us, his laughter echoing through the trees like a death knell. I knew then that we were running out of time, that if we didn't find help soon, we would never make it out of the forest alive. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a clearing, a familiar clearing, one that we had passed through earlier in the day. With a surge of hope, I realized that we were almost back to the campsite, that safety was just within reach. With renewed determination, we pushed on, our feet flying over the forest floor as we raced towards the safety of the campsite. And then, finally, we burst into the clearing, our hearts pounding in our chests as we collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but alive. As we caught our breath, I glanced around nervously, half expecting to see the man emerging from the darkness to finish what he had started. But there was no sign of him, no trace of the terror that had pursued us through the forest. With a cry of relief, I stumbled towards my family, gathering them into my arms and holding them close as we huddled together in the darkness. And as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, I knew that we had escaped the nightmare that had threatened to consume us. We had survived, battered and bruised but alive, our bond as a family stronger than ever in the face of unimaginable horror. I booked a stay at a mountain retreat for a weekend getaway, hoping to unwind and relax away from the hustle and bustle of city life. The pictures online showed a cozy lodge nestled amidst snow-covered trees, promising a serene escape from the stresses of everyday life. But as soon as we arrived, I could sense that something was off. The air was heavy with an eerie stillness, and the lodge itself seemed to loom ominously against the backdrop of the snow-covered mountains. Ignoring my unease, I checked us in and we settled into our room, eager to start our weekend of relaxation. But as the sun began to set and the snow started to fall harder, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. That night, as we gathered around the fireplace in the common area, I noticed a strange tension in the air. The other guests seemed on edge, whispering amongst themselves and casting nervous glances around the room. I tried to dismiss it as my imagination running wild, but when I caught sight of a figure lurking in the shadows outside the lodge, my heart skipped a beat. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. As the night wore on, the storm outside grew fiercer, the wind howling through the trees like a banshee's wail. We huddled closer to the fire, seeking comfort in its warm glow as the darkness pressed in around us. But then, just as I was starting to drift off to sleep, I heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from somewhere outside the lodge. At first, I tried to convince myself it was just the wind, but the sound grew louder and more insistent with each passing moment. I glanced around the room, searching for any sign of what could be causing the noise, but all I could see was darkness and shadows. And then, without warning, the power went out, plunging us into total darkness. Panic gripped me as I groped blindly for a flashlight, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to make sense of what was happening. And then, just as suddenly as it had gone out, the power flickered back on, casting a flickering light over the room. But as I looked around, I realized that something was horribly wrong. The other guests were gone, their belongings strewn haphazardly around the room as if they had left in a hurry. I called out for them, but there was no answer. It was as if they had vanished into thin air, leaving behind only their empty rooms as silent testament to their presence. Terrified, I ran to the front door, desperate to escape the lodge and whatever horrors lay within. But when I tried to open it, I found it locked tight, as if it had been sealed shut from the outside. Panic rising in my chest, I pounded on the door, shouting for help until my voice was hoarse. But there was no response, only the echo of my own screams bouncing off the walls of the empty lodge. I retreated to my room, locking the door behind me and huddling under the covers as I waited for morning to come. But as the hours dragged on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps. I held my breath, listening intently as they drew closer and closer, until they were right outside my door. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I was now alone in the lodge. Whatever was out there, lurking in the darkness, was coming for me. But just as I braced myself for the worst, the door burst open and a group of rescuers stormed into the room, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. They quickly ushered me out of the lodge and into the safety of their waiting vehicles, explaining that they had received a distress call from someone trapped inside. As we drove away from the lodge, I looked back one last time, my heart heavy with relief and fear. I may have escaped with my life, but the memory of that night would haunt me forever. It all started innocently enough, just a weekend hiking trip to escape the hustle and bustle of city life. I packed my backpack with essentials, food, water, a map, and a compass, and set off into the wilderness, eager to explore the great outdoors. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the world around me seemed to fade away, replaced by the serene beauty of nature. The air was crisp and clean, the trees towering overhead, and the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. But as I trekked deeper into the wilderness, I stumbled upon something that sent chills down my spine, a clearing in the forest, hidden from view by a thick canopy of trees. And in the center of the clearing stood a group of people, dressed in dark robes and chanting in unison. At first, I thought it was just a group of hikers like myself, maybe practicing some kind of meditation or yoga. But as I watched from a distance, I realized that there was something off about them, something sinister and unsettling. Their voices rose and fell in a hypnotic rhythm, and their movements were slow and deliberate, as if they were in some kind of trance. And then, as if sensing my presence, they all turned as one and fixed their gaze on me, their eyes burning with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. But as I turned to leave, I realized that I was surrounded on all sides by dense forest, with no clear path back to civilization. Panic began to rise within me, threatening to consume me whole. I tried to retrace my steps, but the trees seemed to shift and move, blocking my path and leading me deeper into the heart of the forest. It was as if the very forest itself was conspiring against me, trapping me in its clutches with no hope of escape. As I stumbled through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest, I could hear the chanting growing louder and louder behind me, echoing through the trees like a sinister drumbeat. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, I stumbled upon something that made my blood run cold. Hidden among the trees was a makeshift campsite, littered with strange symbols and artifacts, candles, incense, and what looked like bones arranged in intricate patterns. It was as if I had stumbled upon the lair of some ancient cult, hidden from view by the dense foliage of the forest. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the chanting stopped, leaving me in a deafening silence that seemed to stretch on for an eternity. I waited, holding my breath and straining my ears for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, no sound, no movement, nothing to indicate that anyone was still out there. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. With trembling hands, I gathered up my things and made a break for it, running as fast as I could through the trees, desperate to put as much distance between myself and the cult as possible. But no matter how fast I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that unseen eyes were following my every move, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. It was as if the forest itself had come alive, with every tree and bush hiding some unseen menace waiting to pounce. I pushed myself harder and harder, my lungs burning and my legs aching with exertion, but still, I couldn't seem to shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. It was as if the very air around me was thick with malevolence, suffocating me with its oppressive weight. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I stumbled upon a trail, a faint, winding path that seemed to lead back to civilization. With renewed hope, I followed it, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed for deliverance from whatever horrors lurked in the darkness behind me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I emerged from the forest, blinking in the harsh light of the setting sun. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath and trembling with exhaustion, but alive, somehow, miraculously alive. As I lay there in the dirt, I couldn't help but wonder what had happened back in the forest, what kind of twisted rituals those cultists had been practicing, and what would have happened to me if I hadn't managed to escape. The night was thick with darkness as we ventured into the woods, the path illuminated only by the feeble light of our flashlights. The crisp air hung heavy around us, filled with the sounds of rustling leaves and distant howls of nocturnal creatures. As we hiked deeper into the forest, a sense of unease settled over us, like a weight pressing down on our chests. I glanced nervously at my partner, their face drawn tight with apprehension mirroring my own. Suddenly, we heard it, a faint, eerie chanting drifting through the trees, sending shivers down our spines. We exchanged a nervous glance, our steps faltering as we strained to listen. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, pulling us inexorably towards its source. Against our better judgment, we found ourselves drawn towards a clearing up ahead, the air thick with the scent of incense and something darker, more primal. As we emerged into the clearing, our breath caught in our throats at the sight before us. A group of hooded figures stood in a circle, their voices raised in a haunting chorus that seemed to echo through the night. We froze, rooted to the spot as we watched the ritual unfold before our eyes. Symbols were etched into the earth, candles flickering ominously in the darkness, casting long shadows that danced across the forest floor. My heart hammered in my chest as I realized the gravity of the situation. This was no ordinary gathering. This was something dark and otherworldly, something beyond our comprehension. But before we could turn and flee, the figures turned towards us, their eyes gleaming with an unnatural light that sent a chill down my spine. I felt a cold dread settle over me as I realized that we were trapped, ensnared in a web of darkness that seemed to tighten around us with each passing moment. Desperate, we tried to run, to escape the clutches of whatever malevolent force held us captive. But no matter which way we turned, we found ourselves blocked at every turn, the figures closing in on us with each passing moment. As they drew nearer, I felt a primal fear rise up within me, threatening to consume me whole. But even in the face of certain doom, we refused to give up hope, fighting tooth and nail to break free from the grip of the darkness. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, we stumbled upon a narrow path leading out of the clearing, the darkness slowly giving way to the faint light of dawn. With one final burst of strength, we raced towards the safety of the path, the chanting fading into the distance behind us as we ran. Breathless and shaken, we emerged from the woods, the first light of dawn casting a warm glow over the horizon. We collapsed onto the forest floor, our hearts still pounding in our chests as we struggled to catch our breath. But even as we lay there, safe at last, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something unspeakable. I was driving down a long stretch of highway, the only car for miles around. My gas gauge was hovering dangerously close to empty, so when I spotted a rundown gas station up ahead, I breathed a sigh of relief. Pulling into the gravel lot, I parked my car next to the lone pump and stepped out into the chilly night air. The gas station looked like something straight out of a horror movie, dimly lit, with peeling paint and broken windows. But beggars can't be choosers, so I grabbed the fuel nozzle and began to fill up my tank. As I did, I glanced around, taking in my surroundings. That's when I noticed him, the cashier, standing behind the counter, watching me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. There was something off about him, something not quite right. His eyes were dark and sunken, his face pale and gaunt. But it was more than just his appearance that unnerved me. It was the way he seemed to be studying me, as if trying to peer into my soul. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease as I finished filling up my tank and headed into the convenience store to pay. The bell above the door jingled softly as I entered, and I glanced around, taking in the rows of dusty shelves lined with long-expired snacks and drinks. The cashier was standing behind the counter, his expression unreadable as he watched me approach. I forced a smile and reached into my pocket for my wallet, but as I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I handed him a $20 bill and waited for my change, but instead of taking the money, he just stared at me, his eyes boring into mine. I shifted uncomfortably, wondering what was going on, when suddenly, he spoke. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "This place is cursed." I blinked in surprise, unsure of how to respond. Was he serious? Or was this some kind of sick joke? Before I could say anything, he continued. "Bad things happen to people who come here," he said, his voice growing more urgent. "You need to leave, before it's too late." I felt a chill run down my spine as his words sank in. What did he mean, bad things? And why was he so insistent that I leave? I glanced around nervously, suddenly aware of how isolated we were out here in the middle of nowhere. But before I could gather my thoughts, the door to the convenience store burst open, and a group of rough-looking men stumbled inside. They were laughing and joking loudly, their voices echoing off the walls. I tensed instinctively, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched them approach the counter. The cashier's expression hardened as they drew near, and I could sense the tension in the air. "Hey, old man," one of the men said, his voice slurred with alcohol. "We need some smokes." The cashier didn't respond, just stared at them with cold, empty eyes. The atmosphere in the convenience store grew more tense by the second, until it felt like a powder keg ready to explode. And then, without warning, chaos erupted. The men lunged at the cashier, knocking over shelves and sending products flying. I stumbled backwards, my heart racing as I watched the violence unfold before my eyes. I knew I had to get out of there, and fast. But as I turned to flee, I felt a hand close around my wrist, pulling me back. I spun around, my eyes widening in horror as I came face to face with the cashier. "Run," he said, his voice urgent. Run as fast as you can, and don't look back. I didn't need to be told twice. I wrenched my wrist free from his grip and bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted out into the night. Behind me, I could hear the sounds of the struggle intensifying, the men's shouts and the cashier's cries blending together into a cacophony of chaos. But I didn't dare look back. I just kept running, my legs pumping as fast as they could go, until I was safely back in my car, the engine roaring to life beneath me. I peeled out of the gas station parking lot, my heart still racing as I sped away into the night. It was only when I was miles away, the gas station nothing but a distant memory in my rearview mirror, that I allowed myself to breathe a sigh of relief. I hired a housekeeper to help maintain my new home, thinking it would make my life easier. But soon, things took a dark turn. At first, everything seemed fine. The housekeeper, Mrs. Phillips, was polite and efficient, and she seemed to do a good job of keeping the place clean. But then, strange things started happening. I would come home from work to find things moved around, items missing, or strange marks on the walls. At first, I brushed it off as just my imagination, or maybe Mrs. Phillips moving things around while she cleaned. But as the incidents became more frequent, I started to suspect that something was wrong. I confronted Mrs. Phillips about it, but she just brushed off my concerns, saying that I must have misplaced the items myself or forgotten that I had moved them. I tried to convince myself that she was right, that I was just being paranoid. But then I started noticing other odd behaviors. Mrs. Phillips would linger in the house long after her shift was over, and sometimes I would catch her whispering to herself in the hallway. I tried to ignore it, to convince myself that it was just harmless eccentricity. But then things took a darker turn. One night, I woke up to the sound of someone whispering my name outside my bedroom door. Heart pounding, I crept out of bed and tiptoed towards the door, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was out there. But when I opened the door, there was no one there. I searched the entire house, but it was empty, no sign of Mrs. Phillips or anyone else. I tried to convince myself that it had just been a dream, or maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But then I found something that made my blood run cold, a photograph of me, taken while I slept, tucked under my pillow. I knew then that something was seriously wrong, that Mrs. Phillips was not who she appeared to be. But I didn't know what to do. I was alone in the house with her, and I didn't know how to confront her without putting myself in danger. I tried to leave, to get out of the house and call the police, but every time I tried to open the front door, it was locked tight, as if someone was holding it shut from the other side. Panic rising, I ran to the back door, hoping to escape that way. But when I got there, I found it barricaded shut with heavy furniture, as if someone had been trying to keep me inside. I was trapped, alone in the house with Mrs. Phillips and whatever sinister agenda she had planned for me. I didn't know what to do, where to turn for help. But then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard a noise outside, the sound of footsteps crunching on the gravel driveway, getting closer and closer to the house. With a surge of adrenaline, I ran to the window and looked out, praying to see a neighbor or passerby who could help me. And to my relief, that's exactly what I saw, a group of people approaching the house, led by a police officer. I rushed to the door and threw it open, shouting for help as I ran towards them. Mrs. Phillips tried to stop me, but I pushed past her, desperate to get away from her and whatever twisted plans she had in store. The police quickly took control of the situation, apprehending Mrs. Phillips and searching the house for evidence of her crimes. And what they found was chilling: hidden cameras, listening devices, and evidence of Mrs. Phillips's obsession with me, dating back for months. I was shaken, but relieved to be safe at last. Mrs. Phillips was taken away in handcuffs, and I never saw her again. It was a typical night at the dispatch office for roadside assistance. The phone had been ringing off the hook with calls from stranded motorists, but this one was different. The caller's voice was tense as they described seeing a figure standing by the side of the road, watching them. They sounded genuinely scared, which sent a shiver down my spine. I quickly assured them that help was on the way, dispatching a tow truck to their location. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight, and couldn't help but feel a sense of unease settle over me. As I waited for the tow truck to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that the caller wasn't alone out there on the dark, deserted road. Minutes felt like hours as I anxiously monitored the GPS tracker on the tow truck, willing it to reach the caller's location safely. And then, finally, the truck arrived, but there was no sign of the stranded motorist. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to reach the caller again, but their phone was going straight to voicemail. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I knew that something was terribly wrong. I quickly alerted the authorities, relaying all the information I had about the caller's location and the mysterious figure they had seen. As I waited for news, my mind raced with horrifying possibilities. What if the caller had been abducted? What if they were in danger? Minutes turned into hours as I waited anxiously for any word from the authorities. And then, finally, the phone rang. It was the police, and they had news. They had found the caller's car abandoned on the side of the road, but there was no sign of the caller anywhere. My heart sank as I realized that the worst-case scenario had come true. The caller had disappeared without a trace. As the days passed with no sign of the missing motorist, I couldn't shake the feeling of guilt that gnawed at me. If only I had acted faster, if only I had sent help sooner, maybe things would have turned out differently. But deep down, I knew that there was something more sinister at play here, something beyond my control. Weeks turned into months, and still, there was no sign of the missing motorist. The case remained unsolved, a dark shadow hanging over the small town where it had all begun. But even as life returned to normal for everyone else, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the back of my mind. Because deep down, I knew that whatever had happened to the missing motorist could happen to anyone, and that thought terrified me more than anything else. We were pumped up for our hiking trip, excited to spend some quality time in the great outdoors. Our group consisted of me, Sarah, and a few other friends. We had all the essentials packed: water, snacks, and a map. Or so we thought. As we trekked deeper into the mountains, the scenery became more breathtaking with each step. But as the day wore on, we realized we might have taken a wrong turn somewhere. The trail seemed to disappear into thin air, leaving us stranded in the wilderness with no idea which way to go. Panic started to set in as we frantically searched for any signs of the trail. The sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the forest floor. With darkness looming, tensions among us began to rise. Sarah, always the voice of reason, tried to keep us calm. But as the hours passed and the darkness closed in around us, even her optimism began to wane. We were lost, alone, and running out of options. The forest grew eerily quiet as night fell, broken only by the sound of our footsteps crunching on the forest floor. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down our spines. We stumbled through the darkness, our flashlights casting feeble beams of light into the blackness ahead. Each step felt like a leap of faith, as if at any moment we could stumble into the unknown. Exhausted and terrified, we huddled together for warmth, hoping against hope that someone would come to our rescue. But as the night dragged on, it became clear that we were on our own. The darkness seemed to swallow us whole, enveloping us in its suffocating embrace. We were lost in a sea of trees, with no beacon to guide us home. As the hours ticked by, our fears grew more pronounced. Every shadow seemed to morph into something sinister, every sound an omen of impending doom. But just as we were on the brink of despair, a glimmer of hope appeared on the horizon. A faint glow in the distance, like a beacon calling us home. With renewed determination, we followed the light, stumbling over roots and rocks in our haste to escape the darkness. And as we emerged from the forest, blinking in the pale light of dawn, we realized that we had made it out alive. Relief washed over us like a tidal wave as we collapsed onto the ground, exhausted but grateful to be alive. And as we huddled together, basking in the warmth of the rising sun, we knew that we would never forget the terror of that night in the woods. We were driving down the highway, my family and I, enjoying the road trip and the sights passing by outside the windows. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm glow over the landscape, and we were making good time towards our destination. But then, without warning, everything changed. One moment, the sky was clear and the road was illuminated by the fading light of the sun, and the next, it was like someone had flipped a switch and plunged us into darkness. It happened so suddenly that I barely had time to react, my hands tightening on the steering wheel as I struggled to see through the blackness. I glanced nervously at my family, their faces pale in the dim light of the dashboard. My wife reached out and clutched my hand, her fingers trembling with fear. "What's happening?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. I didn't have an answer for her. All I knew was that something was very wrong, and that we needed to get off the road as quickly as possible. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers shaking as I tried to navigate the screen in the darkness. But when I tried to call for help, there was no signal, no response from the outside world. We were completely alone, stranded on a deserted highway with no other vehicles or signs of life in sight. The darkness pressed in around us, suffocating and oppressive, like a weight on my chest that I couldn't shake off. I tried to keep calm, to reassure my family that everything would be okay, but inside, I was terrified. I had no idea what was happening or how to fix it, and the fear of the unknown was eating away at me, gnawing at my insides like a hungry animal. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I heard it. A sound, faint at first, but growing louder and more menacing with each passing second. It was like a low, guttural growl, echoing through the darkness and sending shivers down my spine. I glanced nervously out the window, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to see what was coming for us. But there was nothing there, nothing but empty darkness stretching out into infinity. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, to convince myself that it was just my imagination running wild. But deep down, I knew that something was out there, lurking in the shadows and waiting to strike. We drove on in silence, the tension in the car thick enough to cut with a knife. Every creak and groan of the engine sent a jolt of fear through me, and I found myself glancing nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness behind us. But there was nothing there, nothing but the empty expanse of the highway stretching out into the night. It was as if we had entered another world, a world where the rules of reality no longer applied and anything was possible. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, to focus on the road ahead and get us to safety. But as the minutes ticked by and the darkness closed in around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was waiting for us just beyond the edge of the headlights. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, the engine sputtered and died, leaving us stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way to escape. My heart sank as I realized that we were completely at the mercy of whatever was out there in the darkness. I glanced nervously at my family, their faces pale and drawn in the dim light of the dashboard. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to find help." But even as the words left my lips, I knew that it was futile. There was no help coming, no rescue waiting just around the corner. We were alone, stranded on a deserted highway with no way out. I opened the door and stepped out into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the horizon for any sign of life. But there was nothing there, nothing but empty darkness stretching out in every direction. I turned back to the car, my hands trembling as I reached for the flashlight in the glove compartment. But when I flicked it on, the beam of light revealed nothing but empty darkness, swallowing up everything in its path. I took a deep breath and tried to calm my racing heart, to focus on finding a way out of this nightmare. But as I turned back to the road, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There, standing in the middle of the highway, was a figure. It was tall and shadowy, its features obscured by the darkness, but there was something unmistakably human about it. I froze in terror, my mind racing as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. But before I could react, the figure vanished into thin air, leaving behind nothing but a lingering feeling of dread. I stumbled backwards, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to catch my breath. My family was watching me, their faces pale and drawn with fear. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking with fear. "We need to run." And without another word, we turned and fled into the darkness, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the empty expanse of the highway as we raced to escape whatever horrors lay waiting for us in the night. We ran, our footsteps pounding against the pavement, echoing through the darkness as we raced to escape the unknown terror that lurked in the shadows. My heart was pounding in my chest, adrenaline coursing through my veins as we pushed ourselves to keep going, to put as much distance between us and whatever had haunted us on that deserted highway. I could feel the panic rising within me, threatening to overwhelm my senses as we fled into the night. But I forced myself to focus, to keep moving forward, knowing that our only chance of survival lay in putting as much distance between us and whatever was out there in the darkness. We ran for what felt like hours, our breath coming in ragged gasps as we pushed ourselves to the brink of exhaustion. But still, the darkness seemed to stretch out endlessly before us, the road disappearing into the night with no end in sight. And then, just when I thought we couldn't go on any longer, I saw it. A faint glow in the distance, barely visible through the darkness, but unmistakably real. It was the lights of a small town, a beacon of hope in the vast expanse of the night. I felt a surge of relief flood through me, washing away the fear and exhaustion as we stumbled towards the lights, our legs aching with every step. But even as we drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, watching us, waiting for us to let our guard down. We reached the edge of town just as the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, casting a warm glow over the streets and alleyways. I breathed a sigh of relief as we stumbled into the safety of the town, the darkness of the highway fading away behind us like a bad dream. We found help soon after, a kind stranger who took us in and offered us shelter for the night. And as we sat huddled together in the warmth of their home, surrounded by the comforting glow of lamplight, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the simple joys of safety and companionship. But even as we tried to put the events of that night behind us, I knew that the memory would stay with us forever, a reminder of the fragility of life and the darkness that lurks just beyond the edge of our perception. And as I lay down to sleep, my family safe beside me, I said a silent prayer of thanks to whatever forces had guided us through the darkness, knowing that we were lucky to have escaped with our lives. I was sitting in my city condo, enjoying a quiet evening after a long day at work when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any visitors, so I hesitated before getting up to answer it. When I opened the door, there was no one there, just a package lying on the doorstep. I picked it up and brought it inside, feeling a sense of unease creeping over me. The package was addressed to me, but there was no return address, no indication of who it was from or why it had been sent. Curiosity got the better of me, and I tore open the package to see what was inside. My heart skipped a beat when I saw what it contained: a photograph of myself, taken from outside my window. I felt a chill run down my spine as I looked at the photo, trying to make sense of it. How had someone taken this picture? And why had they sent it to me? I glanced out the window, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me from the shadows. But there was no one, just the empty street below and the distant hum of city traffic. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping over me, telling myself that it was just a prank, that there was a logical explanation for everything. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I decided to call the police, just to be safe. Maybe they could help me figure out who had sent the package and why. But when I picked up the phone, I hesitated. What if this was all just a misunderstanding? What if I was overreacting? In the end, I decided to wait and see if anything else happened before getting the police involved. Maybe whoever had sent the package would come forward and explain themselves, or maybe it was just a one-time thing. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind outside, seemed to fill me with a sense of dread. I tried to distract myself, turning on the TV and flipping through the channels, but nothing could shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Eventually, exhaustion won out over fear, and I decided to call it a night. I locked all the doors and windows, double-checking each one to make sure they were secure, before heading to bed. But sleep eluded me, and I tossed and turned for hours, my mind racing with thoughts of who could have sent the package and why. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. When I woke up, it was to the sound of my phone ringing. I groggily reached for it, still half asleep, and answered it without checking the caller ID. "Hello?" I said, my voice hoarse with sleep. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then a voice spoke, low and menacing. "I told you I'd come for you," it said, sending a shiver down my spine. I dropped the phone in shock, my heart pounding in my chest. How had they found me? What did they want? I stumbled out of bed and ran to the window, but there was no one there, just the empty street below and the distant hum of city traffic. I felt a surge of panic rising inside me, threatening to overwhelm me. I needed to get out of there, to find somewhere safe where I could hide until I figured out what was going on. I grabbed my keys and my wallet, not bothering to grab anything else, and ran out the door, not stopping until I was halfway down the block. I didn't know where I was going, just that I needed to get as far away from that condo as possible. I ducked into the nearest coffee shop and collapsed into a seat, my hands shaking as I tried to catch my breath. I must have looked a mess, because the barista came over to ask if I was okay. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words came out in a jumbled mess, barely coherent. The barista looked concerned and offered to call the police, but I shook my head, not wanting to involve them unless absolutely necessary. Instead, I called a friend and asked if I could stay with them for a few days until I figured out what was going on. They agreed without hesitation, and I spent the next few days holed up in their spare room, too afraid to leave the house. Eventually, the fear began to fade, replaced by a sense of determination. I wasn't going to let whoever had sent that package scare me away from my own home. I went back to the condo, this time with a plan. I installed security cameras around the perimeter of the building, hoping to catch whoever was stalking me in the act. And sure enough, a few days later, the cameras caught something, a shadowy figure lurking in the alley behind the building, watching my every move. I called the police and showed them the footage, but by the time they arrived, the figure was gone, disappearing into the night without a trace. But even though they never caught whoever was behind it, knowing that I had proof of what had been happening was enough to give me some peace of mind. It was a quiet night at the museum, just like any other. I was doing my rounds, checking the security cameras and making sure everything was in order. But as I glanced at the monitors, I noticed something strange. There were fluctuations in the video feed, like someone was tampering with the cameras. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to pinpoint the source of the interference. It didn't take long for me to realize that it was coming from the Egyptian exhibit. I hurried down the darkened corridors, my footsteps echoing off the walls as I made my way towards the exhibit. As I entered the room, I felt a chill run down my spine. The artifacts, the priceless relics that had been carefully preserved for centuries, were gone. Panic surged through me as I realized that someone had broken into the museum and stolen the artifacts right out from under our noses. I frantically searched the exhibit, hoping to find some clue as to who had done this and why. But as I scanned the room, my heart sank. There was nothing. No sign of forced entry, no fingerprints, nothing to indicate who could have pulled off such a daring heist. I knew I had to act fast. I rushed back to the security office and called the police, telling them everything I had seen and heard. As I waited for them to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me. Who could have done this? And why? Minutes felt like hours as I waited for the police to arrive. Every creak of the building, every rustle of the wind outside made me jump. And then, finally, I heard the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Relief washed over me as I realized that help was on the way. The police arrived and began their investigation, dusting for fingerprints and combing through the security footage. But as they worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It was like there was something lurking in the shadows, watching us, waiting to strike. As the hours ticked by, the police found no trace of the thieves or the stolen artifacts. It was like they had vanished into thin air. I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle over me as I realized that whoever had done this was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for their next opportunity to strike. Days turned into weeks, and still, there was no sign of the thieves or the stolen artifacts. The museum remained closed to the public as the investigation continued. But even as life returned to normal for everyone else, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. Because deep down, I knew that the museum was still not safe, that whoever had stolen the artifacts could strike again at any moment. I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched, like someone, or something, was waiting for the perfect moment to make their move. And as I looked out at the empty museum, I couldn't help but wonder, would we ever catch the thieves? It was a bitterly cold winter night, and I was driving my big rig along the icy roads of the remote northern highways. The wind howled outside, and the snow whipped against the windshield, obscuring my view of the desolate landscape outside. As I navigated the treacherous terrain, my mind wandered, my thoughts drifting to the warmth of my home and the comfort of my bed. But then, up ahead, I saw the headlights of another truck, barreling towards me through the darkness. I tensed up, my grip on the steering wheel tightening as the other truck drew closer. But as it passed, I caught a glimpse of the driver, a shadowy figure behind the wheel, their face obscured by the darkness. Something about them seemed off, their movements jerky and erratic as they sped past me without so much as a glance in my direction. I shook my head, chalking it up to fatigue and the harshness of the winter night. But as I continued on my journey, a sense of unease settled over me like a heavy blanket, weighing me down with an overwhelming feeling of dread. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw the headlights of the other truck again, this time in my rearview mirror. My heart skipped a beat as I watched it approach, its speed increasing with each passing moment. I tried to shake off the feeling of fear that gnawed at me from within, focusing on the road ahead as I pushed my truck to its limits, trying to outrun the other vehicle. But no matter how fast I drove, the other truck stayed right on my tail, its headlights glaring in my mirrors like the eyes of some malevolent creature lurking in the darkness. I could feel my pulse quickening, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps as I fought to stay calm and keep control of my truck. But the other driver showed no signs of letting up, their truck inching closer and closer with each passing second. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the other truck swerved suddenly, narrowly avoiding a collision as it shot past me on the icy road. I let out a sigh of relief, my hands trembling on the steering wheel as I watched it disappear into the darkness ahead. But even as it faded from view, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the pit of my stomach. I tried to push the encounter out of my mind, focusing instead on the task at hand as I continued on my journey through the winter night. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, that I had just narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As I drove, my mind raced with questions, each one more terrifying than the last. Who was the other driver? What did they want with me? And most importantly, why had they been following me in the first place? I didn't have any answers, and the uncertainty gnawed at me like a hungry beast as I pressed on through the darkness, the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. But then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I saw the headlights of the other truck again, this time looming in my rearview mirror like the eyes of some predatory beast. I felt a chill run down my spine as I watched it approach, its headlights shining like beacons in the darkness. And then, with a sickening lurch, I realized what was happening. The other truck wasn't following me, it was hunting me. Panic surged through me like a tidal wave as I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, my truck roaring to life as I pushed it to its limits, desperate to escape the clutches of my pursuer. But no matter how fast I drove, the other truck stayed right on my tail, its headlights casting long shadows on the icy road ahead. I could hear the roar of its engine growing louder and louder with each passing moment, the sound echoing in my ears like the tolling of a death knell. And then, just as I thought all hope was lost, I saw the lights of a small town twinkling in the distance, a beacon of safety in the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I pushed my truck to its limits, racing towards the safety of the town with all the speed I could muster. And then, finally, I saw the lights of the town grow closer and closer, the sound of my pursuer fading into the distance behind me. With a sense of overwhelming relief, I pulled into the safety of the town, the warmth of its lights washing over me like a comforting embrace. I sat there for a moment, catching my breath and trying to calm my racing heart as I reflected on the terrifying ordeal I had just endured. But even as I sat there, safe and sound in the glow of the town's lights, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that lingered in the back of my mind. I knew that the encounter with the other trucker was something I would never forget, a chilling reminder of the dangers that lurked in the darkness of the winter night. So, I moved into this new house with my family a few weeks ago. Seemed like a nice, cozy place at first, perfect for us to start fresh and settle down. But then, weird things started happening. At first, it was just little stuff, things going missing, doors creaking open on their own. I figured it was just the house settling in, you know? Nothing to worry about. But then, we started hearing noises at night, strange, unsettling noises that seemed to come from nowhere. Footsteps echoing down the hallway, whispers drifting through the walls. It was like someone, or something, was lurking in the shadows, watching our every move. At first, we tried to ignore it. Told ourselves it was just our imagination playing tricks on us. But the noises only got louder, more persistent, until we couldn't ignore them anymore. We started to suspect that maybe someone, or something, was living in the walls or the attic. It was the only explanation that made sense. But when we searched the house from top to bottom, we couldn't find any sign of an intruder. That's when things really started to get creepy. One night, I woke up to the sound of scratching coming from the attic. It was faint at first, barely audible over the hum of the air conditioning, but it quickly grew louder and more frantic. I tried to wake up my husband, but he just grumbled and rolled over, too tired to deal with my paranoia. So, I went up to the attic myself, armed with nothing but a flashlight and a sense of dread. As I climbed the creaky old stairs, the scratching grew louder and more insistent, echoing off the walls and sending shivers down my spine. When I finally reached the attic, I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what I would find on the other side of the door. But I knew I had to confront whatever, or whoever, was making those noises. I swung open the door and shone my flashlight into the darkness, half expecting to come face to face with some kind of monster or intruder. But what I saw was even more terrifying. The attic was empty, completely, eerily empty. There was no sign of anyone or anything, no trace of the scratching or the whispers that had driven me up here in the first place. I searched every nook and cranny, convinced that I must have missed something. But there was nothing, just an empty attic with no explanation for the noises that had brought me here. I was about to give up and head back downstairs when I heard it, a soft, chilling whisper, coming from somewhere deep within the shadows. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as I strained to make out the words. It was faint, almost indistinct, but there was no mistaking the sinister tone. "Get out," it whispered, sending a shiver down my spine. "Get out before it's too late." I didn't need to be told twice. I slammed the attic door shut and practically ran back downstairs, my mind racing with fear and confusion. I tried to tell my husband what had happened, but he just brushed it off, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. But I knew what I had heard, and I knew that something was seriously wrong with this house. We tried to go about our lives as normal, but the whispers and the footsteps never stopped. They followed us everywhere we went, haunting our every waking moment and driving us to the brink of madness. Finally, we couldn't take it anymore. We packed up our things and moved out, leaving the house and its secrets behind us for good. But even now, years later, I still can't shake the feeling that something, or someone, is watching me, lurking in the shadows and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I don't know what was living in that house, or why it chose to torment us. I found myself deep in the woods, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. My heart raced as I realized my GPS had malfunctioned, leaving me stranded and disoriented in the wilderness. Panic threatened to consume me as I frantically tried to find my bearings, but the dense trees seemed to close in around me, their twisted branches reaching out like gnarled fingers grasping for my sanity. Every step I took felt like a step deeper into the unknown, my sense of direction slipping away with each passing moment. I called out for help, but my voice seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. As night fell, the woods took on a sinister aura, the shadows dancing and shifting in the moonlight, playing tricks on my already frazzled mind. I stumbled over roots and rocks, each sound echoing through the trees like a mocking laugh. Suddenly, I heard a rustling in the underbrush, and my heart leapt into my throat. I froze, straining my ears for any sign of what could be lurking in the darkness. But the rustling stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving me alone once again with only the sounds of my own ragged breaths to keep me company. I pressed on, my legs aching with exhaustion as I pushed through the dense undergrowth, my mind racing with thoughts of what horrors might be waiting for me in the darkness. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I stumbled upon a clearing in the woods, the moonlight casting an eerie glow over the scene before me. In the center of the clearing stood a series of bizarre and terrifying obstacles, each one more twisted and macabre than the last. There were traps set with cruel efficiency, their mechanisms designed to ensnare anyone who dared to venture too close. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was not alone in the forest, that someone or something had set these traps with malicious intent. I tried to backtrack, to find another way out of the woods, but no matter which direction I turned, I found myself faced with more of these sinister obstacles, each one seemingly designed to keep me trapped in the forest forever. Fear gripped me like a vice as I realized that I was being hunted, that whatever had set these traps was closing in on me with each passing moment. I pushed myself to keep moving, to keep searching for a way out, but the forest seemed to conspire against me, its dark and twisted heart intent on claiming me as its own. Just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance, the first sign of civilization I had seen since my ordeal began. With renewed determination, I pushed through the undergrowth, the light growing brighter with each step until finally, I burst through the trees and stumbled into a clearing. I collapsed to the ground, tears streaming down my face as I realized that I was safe, that I had escaped the horrors of the forest. But even as I lay there, gasping for breath and trembling with exhaustion, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. I boarded the cruise ship with excitement, looking forward to a week of relaxation and luxury at sea. The ship was massive, gleaming in the sunlight as it towered over the dock. But as soon as I stepped on board, a sense of unease settled over me. At first, everything seemed normal. The crew was friendly, the other passengers were chatting and laughing as they settled into their cabins. But as the days passed, I began to notice that something was off. People started disappearing. At first, it was just one or two passengers who failed to show up for dinner or didn't return to their cabins at night. But soon, it became a regular occurrence, with more and more passengers vanishing without a trace. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they had fallen overboard or gotten lost in the maze of corridors below deck. But deep down, I knew that something more sinister was at play. I started to keep a close eye on my fellow passengers, watching for any signs of suspicious behavior. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't shake the feeling that the killer was hiding in plain sight, blending in with the crowd. As the days passed, the atmosphere on board grew tense and paranoid. People whispered in hushed tones, casting suspicious glances at their fellow passengers as they moved through the ship. I tried to stay calm, to reassure myself that I was safe, but the fear gnawed at me from the inside, a constant presence that I couldn't shake. And then, one night, it happened. I was walking back to my cabin after dinner when I heard a scream echoing through the corridors. My heart pounded in my chest as I followed the sound, my footsteps echoing in the empty halls. When I reached the source of the scream, I froze in horror. A woman lay crumpled on the floor, her throat slashed open, a pool of blood spreading out around her. I stumbled back in shock, bile rising in my throat as I realized that the killer was still on board, still hunting for their next victim. I knew that I had to do something, to find a way to stop the killer before they struck again. But I was paralyzed by fear, unable to think clearly as the panic threatened to overwhelm me. I tried to alert the crew, to tell them what had happened, but they brushed me off, dismissing my claims as the ramblings of a hysterical passenger. Desperate for help, I turned to my fellow passengers, hoping that someone would listen to me, would believe me. But they too turned a blind eye, too consumed by their own fear to offer any assistance. As the days passed, the body count continued to rise, each new victim adding to the sense of dread that hung over the ship like a dark cloud. I knew that I couldn't stay on board any longer, that I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. But the ship was like a prison, its towering walls and endless corridors trapping me in a nightmare from which there was no escape. I tried to keep a low profile, to blend in with the crowd as I searched for a way off the ship. But everywhere I turned, I was met with dead ends and locked doors, each one a reminder of the trap that I was caught in. And then, just when I had all but given up hope, I stumbled upon a lifeboat hidden away on one of the lower decks. It was a slim chance, but it was my only hope of escape. I waited until nightfall, when the ship was shrouded in darkness and the crew was distracted, before slipping away from my cabin and making my way down to the lifeboat. I climbed inside, my heart pounding in my chest as I cast one last glance back at the ship that had become my prison. And then, with a silent prayer on my lips, I pushed off into the darkness, leaving behind the horror that had haunted me for so long. It was just another day on the job for me, Emily, a volunteer search and rescue worker always ready to answer the call for help. When the distress call came in from a stranded hiker in the remote wilderness, I didn't hesitate to spring into action. Gathering my team, we wasted no time in heading out to locate the hiker and bring them to safety. The sense of urgency hung heavy in the air as we navigated the rugged terrain, our eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of the lost soul we were tasked with rescuing. But as we delved deeper into the heart of the wilderness, a feeling of unease settled over me. The silence of the forest seemed to press in on us, and I couldn't shake the sense that we were being watched by unseen eyes. As we pressed on, following the coordinates provided by the hiker's distress call, the tension in the air grew thicker with each passing moment. It was as if the very forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, we stumbled upon it, a clearing in the woods that seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. It was there that we found the hiker, cowering in fear as if they had seen something beyond comprehension. But before we could react, a shadowy figure emerged from the trees, a lone man with wild eyes and a haunted expression. He warned us to turn back, to leave the forest and never return, but something in his voice told me that there was more to his warning than met the eye. Ignoring his pleas, we pressed on, determined to fulfill our duty and bring the hiker to safety. But as we ventured deeper into the woods, we soon realized that we were not alone. Strange noises echoed through the trees, and the feeling of being watched grew stronger with each step we took. It was as if the very forest itself had come alive, its ancient secrets awakening to confront us. And then, just as we thought things couldn't get any worse, we stumbled upon a clearing filled with makeshift shrines and symbols carved into the earth. It was a chilling sight, one that spoke of dark rituals and unspeakable horrors lurking just beyond the edge of our vision. As we surveyed the scene, a sense of dread settled over me like a heavy blanket. We were in over our heads, facing an enemy far more dangerous than we had ever imagined. But there was no turning back now. With the hiker's life hanging in the balance, we pressed on, determined to uncover the truth behind the dark secrets of the forest. As we ventured deeper into the wilderness, the sense of unease grew stronger with each passing moment. It was as if the very air was alive with malevolent intent, waiting to ensnare us in its deadly embrace. And then, just when we thought things couldn't get any worse, we stumbled upon a hidden cave hidden deep within the heart of the forest. It was there that we found the source of the darkness, a group of men and women gathered around a flickering fire, their faces twisted with madness as they chanted in an ancient language. With horror, we realized that we had stumbled upon a cult, a group of fanatics who worshipped the dark forces that lurked in the depths of the forest. And as they turned their attention towards us, we knew that our worst nightmares were about to come true. In a desperate bid for survival, we fought back against the cultists, using every ounce of strength and skill we possessed to fend off their relentless attacks. But they were relentless, driven by a madness that knew no bounds. Just when it seemed that all hope was lost, a miracle occurred. With a roar of engines, a team of reinforcements arrived on the scene, driving back the cultists and rescuing us from certain doom. As we made our way back to civilization, battered and bruised but alive, I couldn't help but reflect on the horrors we had witnessed in the heart of the wilderness. It was a reminder that evil can lurk in the most unexpected of places, waiting to ensnare the unwary in its deadly embrace.